Boo! Well, hello there, boys and ghouls. We hope we didn't startle you too hard there. It's only us, your good old friends at SCP Explained. We all love a little fright now and then, don't we? After all, that would explain our fascination with the morbid tales of the SCP Foundation. Rotten old men who can walk through walls and tear you limb from limb in their own private hells. Nightmarish psychic diseases that turn anyone who touches them into a horrible abomination. Evil masks that kill you and take over your body, using it to do acts of great cruelty until you melt down into black goo. Oh, you're not scared of those. You think you're so tough, so prepared for anything that even those anomalous beings of pure terror can't break through the impenetrable shell of your bravery? Well, I suppose we better bring out the big guns then. Just remember, when you're huddled in the corner, bones rattling in fear, that you brought this on yourself. After all, there's no entity quite as good as inspiring screams as SCP-2086. So please stay a while and find out why this one's called Too Spooky. We're sorry you had to hear that, but you really can't blame us for having a little theatricality with this one. In fact, having a good grasp of theatricality is actually essential to everyone dealing with SCP-2006. Forget gunplay, rituals, and mind games. SCP-2006 requires Foundation-subsidized acting lessons in order to work on his containment, which, even as Foundation containment methods go, is pretty darn strange. When you got into this line of work, you probably expected you'd be in high-intensity battles with SCP-682, or attending conferences on how to best repel the menace of the Scarlet King, not acting out scenes from A Streetcar Named Desire with Dr. Bright. But believe us, it's important work. As they'll probably tell you at these classes, there are no small parts, only small actors. You won't spend time at these sessions perfecting Shakespearean soliloquies. Instead, you'll be adopting a much narrower focus, learning how to properly act and express fear. The more convincingly scared you can appear, the better. Because when it comes to SCP-2006, your job and potentially even your life depend on it. Plus, it's the only time that peeing your pants and collapsing on the job may actually get you a raise, rather than just a series of strange looks from your coworkers. When you pass that course with flying colors, you'll finally be ready to actually come face to face with the Prince of Nightmares himself, SCP-2006. By this point, you've had it drilled into your head so many times that you could never forget it. For the love of God, whatever this thing does, you act scared. Don't stonewall, don't smile, and whatever you do, don't laugh. Laughing at SCP-2006 is probably the fastest way you can get demoted to swabbing feces in SCP-173's chamber. If you know what's good for you, you'll dial up that fear. When the big day comes, you're sent into SCP-2006's airtight containment chamber with a special package. That time of the month has come once again. You need to deliver the goods. You spot a television in the corner first, still on but tuned to static. You're pondering what a waste of electricity this is when SCP-2006, who'd been hiding behind an armchair, decided to finally strike. You barely had time to realize what was going on when a large, dark shape suddenly blotted out your vision. It was over 6 feet tall and looked like a man in an exceedingly cheap gorilla costume, except with a goofy diving helmet with what looked like TV antennas on top. It waved its arms wildly, as if to hammer home the point that, yes, this really was happening, and you should be terrified by it. The creature bellowed, "Fear me, mortal! I am the mighty Roman! Cower in fear!" At that moment, your weeks of training kicked in almost like a reflex. You let out an ear-piercing shriek and dropped down to the floor, desperately crawling away from the goofy-looking creature. Eyes wide, breathing heavy, moments frantic and defensive. You gather yourself up in one of the room's corners and curl into a ball, covering your face. Imbuing your voice with a well-practiced quiver, you say, "Please, mighty Roman, don't hurt me! I've so much to live for, just please let me go!" The monster holds a quote-unquote menacing pose for a few seconds longer, before slackening into a joyful laugh. It even extended a rubbery gorilla paw to help you up. Of course, you hesitate for a few seconds, gazing fearfully, waiting for it to say, "Ha ha ha, it's just me, Doc. I got you pretty good, didn't I?" And as far as he knows, yes, he did. You're sure to never slip into the body language of comfort. It's utterly vital that SCP-2086 truly believes that he's scary to you, even though he looks like a terrible monster costume from an even worse low-budget B-movie. Though specifically, the Ro-Man, the monster from the 1950 trash classic Robot Monster. You tell SCP-2006 that you're here with some more stimulus material for him, and hand him a plastic bag. When he asks you what you've brought him this time, you tell him you can't even look at it. If you so much as laid eyes on it, you'd slip into a terrified state of catatonia. You'd honestly rather look at 096 than look at what you've brought him today. SCP-2006 cocked his head to the side and asked, "What's 096? Oh, no. The terror that was fake before wasn't quite so fake now. You'd slipped up, buddy. And if you didn't come up with a good save quickly, you would be in deep trouble. You gulp and take a quick breath, trying to compose yourself before saying that 096 is just another movie. One that's not nearly as scary as the one you've prepared for him. It seemed to satisfy him, so you internally breathe a sigh of relief and turn to make your exit. You've just left SCP-2006 with a DVD copy of the 1977 classic Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, a somewhat obscure horror movie about an evil bed created by a demon. That should tide the eccentric anomaly over for another month. So, you're probably wondering, what actually just happened? What's the logic? What are the connections between the strange sequence of events we all just witnessed? While it may seem bizarre now, once you know more about SCP-2006, it'll all make sense. We can't promise it'll actually seem any less bizarre by the end, though. SCP-2006 is a Keter-class shape-shifting anomaly. Its default form is a floating sphere of about 50 centimeters in diameter. Not exactly terrifying. And this is actually a big problem for SCP-2006, as the mischievous anomaly has an almost compulsive desire to scare people. Not to physically harm them in any way, just give them a good old-fashioned spook. He's shown to be pretty much indestructible, so neutralization is off the table. You may be thinking, he seems like a pretty harmless goofball, why would anyone want to neutralize him? And, well, we'll answer that one later. Back to SCP-2006's favorite hobby, scaring people. While 2006 seems to practically live off of giving a good scare, he's thankfully no Pennywise. 2006 has no inherent knowledge of what scares humans, and thus has to learn what scares humans from external sources. This unique weakness to SCP-2006's ability is one the Foundation has discovered as an ingenious method of exploiting for its containment. They simply keep SCP-2006 misinformed on what people actually find scary, tricking it to make sure that it's always hopelessly inept at its hobby. Their method of achieving this is twofold. Firstly, they give SCP-2006 a monthly supply of the worst horror movies you can imagine. True bargain bucket B-movie schlock. Troll 2, Leprechaun in the Hood, Birdemic, Shock and Terror, a personal favorite, The Ginger Dead Man, The Beast of Yucca Flats, Plan 9 from Outer Space, a runner-up for me, The Creeping Terror, The Man Without a Body, Manos, The Hands of Fate, Track of the Moon Beast, and of course, the seminal classic, IKEA, a movie about an evil caveman being unfrozen and terrorizing Palm Springs. Movies like this are a perfect mechanism for tricking SCP-2006, because it sees the characters in the movies reacting with fear to the terrible, hokey monsters rampaging across backlots and sound stages, and starts to believe that these B-movie beasts are actually scary. That's the first part of the trick, and you've probably already figured out the second half. The Foundation makes sure that any employees who interact with SCP-2006 in any capacity must play the part of appearing actually, genuinely frightened by it. This 1-2 punch of trickery keeps SCP-2006 successfully bamboozled. As such, despite being a creature largely based around creating fear, albeit in a more friendly, playful way than most anomalies, it's seen as a joke among staff members. It wouldn't be surprising to hear that different staff members took turns laughing at surveillance footage, or that the latest Site Halloween party, a few drunken researchers tried to trick SCP-2006 into assuming the form of David S. Pumpkins from Saturday Night Live. I believe they also received angry phone calls from Tom Hanks' agent the next day. As you could probably gather, developing such an unimpressed attitude to containing anomalies with the SCP Foundation is never a good thing. After all, even some of the most innocent-looking ones can hide surprisingly dark secrets. Dr. Randall Owings, the site director for Site 118, where SCP-2006 is held, released a stern memorandum to everyone working in 2006's proximity. It read, "I've been getting reports of some of the lax behavior regarding SCP-2006. Many personnel have been heard laughing at SCP-2006 during surveillance when it watches a new movie, or when it attempts to scare individuals. Some personnel have been heard questioning why SCP-2006 is classified as a Keter entity. I am here to remind you that a Keter entity is a Keter entity, regardless of how innocuous it may seem. No, SCP-2006 is not a rampaging demigod, nor is it a regenerating super lizard. However, it possesses the same level of danger as any other Keter that the Foundation has contained. Think of SCP-2006's purpose. It wishes to scare people. Imagine what would happen if SCP-2006 broke containment and found out what really scared people. Imagine if it saw the horror and fear of war, or the concepts of paranoia or phobias common to each and every human being. Imagine if it found the true horror of a nuclear holocaust or an XK-class scenario. Now couple that with an entity that possesses shape-shifting abilities with no known limits, and you'll understand why it's classified as Keter. All personnel mentioned above have been suitably disciplined. I do not want to hear about this again." SCP-2006 is only as harmless as the Foundation's containment procedures allow it to be. It's why it can never know about other anomalies, or any actually frightening works of fiction. If ever SCP-2006 became aware of the true sources of human fear, there would be no stopping it, seeing as the creature appears to be indestructible. Like many of the anomalies kept under lock and key by the SCP Foundation, it is a ticking time bomb that one little mistake could turn into an utter catastrophe. Terrible movies and theatrical staff members need to keep SCP-2006 in the dark about what actually scares us, because beyond that, the only limit to the danger of SCP-2006 is the human imagination. And that, my friends, is a very spooky thought indeed. An SCP Foundation researcher sits at a table inside of a standard containment cell. These are often dangerous places to be, especially when the SCP you're supposed to be studying is one that you can't see. The researcher is taking notes, unsure of exactly what is going to happen next. He can hear the sounds of knives scraping behind, of flesh sizzling and searing from high heat. He braces himself as a burst of heat hits the back of his head, as if a fireball has erupted. An object floats through the air and settles in front of him on the table. It's a plate of food, and it looks delicious. It may surprise you to learn that there is no rule that the SCP Foundation must deal exclusively with violent and vicious creatures. Not every SCP held in containment shares the same malevolence and contempt for humanity as SCP-682, or the world-ending threat posed by the likes of SCP-2317. Some, perhaps not many, but some, are benign and might even seem outwardly friendly. But you'd still be taking a huge risk to assume that anything contained by the SCP Foundation is completely harmless. Such is the case with SCP-5031. As per the Foundation's containment procedures, this quasi-humanoid, meaning it appears to have some vaguely human features, is held in an airtight cell that is regularly checked by Foundation personnel on a bi-weekly basis. SCP-5031 has no need for regular nutrition or regular interactions from staff. The trick with SCP-5031 is not being eaten by it, since though it doesn't need food, it does still hunt and consume anything it encounters, human or otherwise. Avoiding being eaten is hard enough with creatures that can actually be seen, but like so many other creatures the Foundation keeps contained, SCP-5031 has developed an almost perfect defense mechanism, which is when observed, it will literally cease to exist. Some might choose to refer to this as a quantum lock. However, it is worth noting that traces left by SCP-5031 still remain observable when the creature has temporarily disappeared. For example, trails of blood and scratch marks left behind by SCP-5031 still exist when the SCP itself does not. Naturally, this makes both avoiding the creature and capturing it using cameras difficult. However, when SCP-5031's existence ceases, it still casts a shadow. From this, researchers have been able to determine several of the creature's physical traits. Based on its silhouette, it has been deduced that SCP-5031 levitates about half a meter above ground level, sports an abnormally small necklace head atop an elongated torso, approximately 1.9 meters long, with 3 sets of spindly lower arms that branch outwards. Using these arms and its loosely hanging body, SCP-5031 will lower itself to hunt any human or animal that draws near to it, and uses the blade-like tail to cut up food. Perhaps the most interesting facet of SCP-5031 beyond its defensive capabilities and apparent physical attributes are the series of 9 tests conducted by senior researcher Stanley Huxtable. Appalled by the conditions that the creature was being kept in, Huxtable took over the role of HCL supervisor for SCP-5031. Having grown increasingly frustrated and empathetic towards the creature, listening to its screams from inside its iron containment unit, Huxtable devised a series of tests to introduce SCP-5031 to various different stimuli as a way to better understand the creature, and hopefully keep it contained in a way that didn't seem to cause so much suffering. It's worth remembering that the SCP Foundation makes its mission to be cold, not cruel, in performing their duties to protect normality, and many of the researchers and staff are just as capable of having empathy for creatures as you might for a stray animal at a shelter. The first of Huxtable's tests involved installing speakers in SCP-5031's cell, through which a variety of different ambient and popular pieces of music were played to see if they had any effect on reducing the creature's stress. By judging SCP-5031's stress levels based on how much it screamed when compared to normal, Huxtable was able to determine how to best use music to calm the creature. SCP-5031 seemed to convey higher levels of stress when listening to Morning Forest, Deep Grotto, and Seaside Paradise ambience, as well as the best of late 60s British rock band Jethro Tull. However, the best of Mozart, Enya, Kiss, and Ben Folds produced dramatically different results, decreasing SCP-5031's apparent stress. Following this test, senior researcher Huxtable compiled a playlist featuring SCP-5031's favorite music. Over time, the stress-reducing effects of music on SCP-5031 seemed to decrease, but keeping the playlist on shuffle seemed to keep the creature consistently calmer than it had been previously. The next test involved introducing inanimate objects into SCP-5031's enclosure to monitor its reactions and how its stress levels were affected. When a softball was thrown into the enclosure, SCP-5031 immediately sliced the ball in two with its tail in one swift motion. A similar result occurred when researchers threw the creature a basketball, which was quickly punctured and sliced open by SCP-5031's tail. Its stress levels first seemed to diminish when the creature was offered a bowling ball, which it rolled around the enclosure and then later knocked it against a second bowling ball. However, when one of the balls chipped, rendering it unable to roll properly, SCP-5031's stress increased dramatically until a replacement was offered. Researcher Huxtable noted that SCP-5031 seemed to possess a similar level of motor skills to an average human toddler, with similarly explosive emotional reactions to match. Next, when given the choice between two food sources at opposite ends of its enclosure, SCP-5031 seemed to gravitate towards higher quality food, most notably favored cooked rotisserie chickens over animal carcasses. It even chose this option over a live chicken, using its tail to cut its food into more manageable bite-sized portions, rather than ripping its meat with its hands or teeth like many of its fellow SCPs. Researcher Huxtable recorded these findings and highlighted that, even though SCP-5031 didn't need to eat in order to survive, providing the creature with food of a better quality marginally reduced its stress. Senior researcher Huxtable next attempted to test SCP-5031's coexistence with other living subjects, each time making sure that the creature had been adequately fed to avoid any unseemly incidents. First, a live chicken was introduced. SCP-5031 rolled its bowling ball at high speed towards the chicken, increasing both its and the chicken's stress levels, and inadvertently killing the chicken in the process. When a second chicken was introduced, SCP-5031 gently rolled a basketball towards it, but ceased any further engagement after the chicken squawked from being hit by the ball. Next to be introduced into the enclosure was a blindfolded D-Class staff member, who was instructed to sit down and roll the basketball towards SCP-5031. After doing so for several minutes, the creature began to approach the D-Class subject, who was instructed to remove their blindfold to cease the creature's existence and prevent any potentially deadly incidents. Finally, researcher Huxtable had another Class D engage in a game of catch with SCP-5031 while facing away from the creature. This test proceeded successfully, and senior researcher Huxtable remarked how SCP-5031's motor skills were improving, albeit gradually and with some gentle encouragement. Through Huxtable's tests, the creature was learning. The next test, focused on teaching SCP-5031 linguistic symbols, utilized LCD displays and buttons connected to a food dispenser. One display showed an image of a rock, and the other an image of a rotisserie chicken. After some brief probing, SCP-5031 was quickly able to understand that pressing the button under the correct display would dispense a rotisserie chicken for it to eat. The creature was later able to adapt when, the following day, the screen displays and materials dispensed were swapped, and then later set to swap at random intervals. When additional rock dispensing stations were introduced, this time displaying the word rock as opposed to an image, SCP-5031 was able to determine which station dispensed chicken through a process of elimination. Whenever the functions and displays were swapped, SCP-5031 would find whichever displayed the word chicken to receive its food. The final phase of this test presented SCP-5031 with a single station, displaying the word chicken, but with a button that would remain inactive unless the creature spelled out the same word with a collection of lettered blocks it was provided with. After some initial confusion and frustrations as to why the button would not dispense food when pressed, SCP-5031 was able to assemble the word correctly, not only activating the button and dispensing food, but proving to researcher Huxtable that the creature was capable of learning language. Huxtable continued to test the creature, encouraging it to spell words using lettered blocks as a method of communicating. By increasing SCP-5031's vocabulary and the amount of human interaction it received, senior researcher Huxtable observed that SCP-5031 was gradually learning to sing, albeit non-verbally, as well as to juggle with its 6 hands, and was even communicating its food preferences and dish pairings. Later, another Class D, D-52125, was introduced to SCP-5031's enclosure to aid in further testing. Through D-52125's instructions, the creature quickly learned to draw using crayons, and created artworks depicting itself, its newfound friend D-52125, researcher Huxtable, a cat, and a rotisserie chicken. SCP-5031's new creative side didn't stop there though, as the creature quickly learned to play chopsticks in only 2 days once a piano was introduced into the enclosure. SCP-5031 even managed to start creating its own original, admittedly crude, compositions. Next, a spice rack was placed inside the creature's cell, and D-52125 demonstrated how to season meat. This proved to be SCP-5031's new favorite hobby, as it spent the next 3 days experimenting with different combinations of foods and spices, using its letter blocks to request more garlic powder. Interestingly, the creature only created artwork or music when D-52125 was present, but seemed to thoroughly enjoy its experimentation with food when left alone. Following this development, senior researcher Huxtable devised a new test for SCP-5031, providing the creature with cooking utensils and using D-52125 to demonstrate. 5031 was shown how to prepare a variety of different dishes, from hamburgers and tacos to Mongolian beef, steak, clam chowder, and profiteroles. In addition to a small peanut allergy, this 8th test revealed SCP-5031 to be a phenomenal chef, possessing culinary skills far beyond the average person. The creature quickly and enthusiastically embraced its newfound talents, concocting its very own brand new recipes, with D-52125 even volunteering to be the first to taste test 5031's dishes. It was shortly after this test that SCP-5031 spoke its very first word. And it should come as no surprise that the word was salt. Naturally, senior researcher Huxtable was very proud of the progress the creature had made with its development. The final test almost seemed to be what the creature was born for. Over the course of 2 months, SCP-5031 was tasked with creating a full 3-course meal, which would then be served to Foundation staff for Thanksgiving. SCP-5031 not only rose to the task, but exceeded all of researcher Huxtable's expectations, creating a meal that even Gordon Ramsay would be hard-pressed to find fault with. The creature created a first course consisting of sweet potato miso soup seasoned with turmeric. Next came a beautiful duck confit, glazed luxuriously with apple cider and topped generously with sweet cranberry compote, paired with a side of butternut squash gnocchi and served on a bed of kale seasoned with truffle salt. The grand finale of the exquisite meal was a spiced cassava pie for dessert, complemented with the finest French vanilla ice cream and a maple hazelnut syrup. And SCP-5031 didn't stop there. The creature also debuted one of its original musical compositions to complement the decadent meal it had created. As the staff enjoyed the food, SCP-5031 performed live from its enclosure the deeply moving Piano Concerto for 6 hands, to an overwhelmingly positive response from not only senior researcher Huxtable, but the entire Foundation staff. As a fitting end to the creature's tale, Huxtable reported that, during the Thanksgiving banquet it had created, SCP-5031's stress levels reduced entirely. New kinder containment measures that would keep 5031 safer but also far more contented were submitted for approval. Perhaps some of you may find it refreshing to learn that SCP-5031 isn't simply just another malicious, malevolent monster that the Foundation has to keep under lock and key for the safety of the world. Instead, SCP-5031 is a gentle, if a little frightening at first, creature that just requires careful and considered guidance instead of a cold iron cage and around-the-clock armed guards. Through testing, senior researcher Stanley Huxtable and his fellow Foundation staff were not only able to help the creature develop, but also found what makes it tick, and not just for the purposes of containing it. Instead, it is hoped that SCP-5031's creativity and flair for culinary and musical masterpieces can continue to thrive and grow, under the proud watch of researcher Huxtable.
The shinobi crouched low on the pagoda roof and listened to the night air. Up here in the mountains, away from the hustle and bustle of the markets in town, it was almost silent, just the distant rattle of shutters somewhere behind him. The mountain shrine was tucked out of sight, so far into the countryside that no one would stumble onto it by accident. No one would come here without a reason. The shinobi knew the face of his target, a warlord turned politician with more blood on his hands than the assassin sent to kill him. By the burning glow of the night sky, the shinobi could see the man kneeling at the shrine. The path was made up of small stones, so he'd have to drop onto the grass and creep around the pond to approach his target. No guards. No one else was there at all. This was the spot where the man came to pray when he was struggling to sleep, perhaps trying to atone for the lives he'd taken. Perhaps he didn't care at all. The ninja drew the blade in total silence and timed his drop to the ground with a rattling noise in the distance. With each dainty step, he closed the distance to his target, readying the blade over his head. It was done in a moment. The man was dead before his body hit the ground. He likely didn't even notice, as the steel had severed the nerves running down his spinal cord. So sharp was the blade that had slid through his bones like a fish through water. Raising the blade to his eyes, the shinobi cleaned it quickly. If he was seen with blood on his sword, he would immediately be implicated. Not that he was ever seen, but precautions like this were what kept him out of sight for all these years. When you lived in the Valley of Ashes, the burial grounds for countless wars, you had to become a shadow, become one of the ancient spirits haunting the woods. But as he wiped the red from the steel, he caught a flash of light in the reflection, an orange glow marking a jagged line across the metal. That's strange. Sunset was several hours ago. Come to think of it, why was there an orange glow in the sky? He snapped his neck around to see the fires through the gates into the pagoda's garden. Down by the ocean's edge at the foot of the mountains was the city where he had always lived, and it was on fire. Leaping up onto the walls, he stood up straight, surveying the horror scene taking place before him. Thick plumes of smoke billowed up into the night sky, so dense and large that it seemed to become the blackness of the night. It was hard to make out much of what was going on down there. The shinobi looked everywhere to try to see the invading army or the rioters, but there were none. Just people running in all directions, like ants out of a flooding nest. But there, moving in amongst the smoke, were other shapes, impossibly tall, lumbering around like people. People that towered over the houses, that had to crane down to the ground to scoop up the poor civilians who were running this way and that. The shinobi stood there terrified as he realized that the rattling sound he'd been hearing all night wasn't from any shutters at all. He could do nothing but watch as the trees in front of him trembled and buckled in all directions as a hulking, shadowy figure lumbered towards him. The Imperial Japanese Anomalous Matters Examination Agency, or the IJAMEA, was a Japanese agency responsible for tracking a number of mysterious and often dangerous artifacts, creatures, and anomalies prior to the Second World War. In 1945, the IJAMEA was shut down and absorbed into the SCP Foundation. All of these data, historic records, and anomalies were all transferred over into the Foundation's control. Reasons for this were partially political and partially in the interest of world peace. The formation of the IJMEA was influenced heavily by Japan's ties with Germany in the first half of the 20th century. The Imperial German Anomalous Matters Examination Agency was the blueprint for their Japanese equivalent. However, with increasing militarism in Japan throughout the 20th century, the IJMEA became increasingly obsessed with trying to harness their anomalous discoveries in the interests of military power. Their goal became the establishment of a yokai battalion, powerful enough to establish them as one of, if not the world's greatest superpower. Following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered in the Second World War and agreed to dissolve its military, including the IJAMEA. That left the Foundation with the task of picking up the threads left behind and trying to come up with new ways of securing, containing, and protecting some of Japan's most deadly SCPs. Few more deadly and evasive than the entities that were too much, even for the yokai battalion. SCP-2863. In 1946, cleanup operations were in full effect, trying to deal with the fallout from the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Crews dressed in lead-lined suits worked around the clock, burying radioactive material and trying to remove as much contaminated debris as possible. Rebuilding the city was still a long way off. At various points, the wind would kick up and carry the dust left behind into the air, creating a dangerous radioactive haze. Crews continued to work through such conditions as the understanding of airborne contamination was still in its infancy. Watanabe Goro was one such worker. Midway through a night shift and clasping a damp rag to his mouth, he pushed on through the dust, clearing out building after building. They had spent the morning carrying corpses out of an unidentifiable building. The corpses themselves were pretty much worn away too, just skeletons really, charred by the blast from months before. As Goro staggered along the street, he kept feeling like he was imagining things. The long hours and traumatic conditions were enough to make him see all kinds of things in his dreams, but he kept feeling like his dreams were starting to creep into the real world. Shadows kept moving through the haze all around him, taller than buildings, staggering around as if they were drunk. They had been appearing all night, just out of sight, but always close by. He stopped and leaned against what was left of a brick wall. There was one of his hallucinations now just up ahead of him. The husks of buildings on either side of him were about as tall as their knees. It must have been 30 meters tall at least. But its legs were strange. There seemed to be a gap in the middle of each of them. They were skinny. No, skeletal. The skeleton's foot crushed a car right in front of him. The crunch of metal was loud enough to snap Goro out of his stupor. This wasn't a hallucination. Hallucinations can't crush cars. With a yelp, he tumbled backwards, staring up into the haze of dust. He saw the shape of a pelvis. Above it, what must have been a ribcage the size of his house, but the creature disappeared into the darkness and the dust. If it was too tall for him to see its face, maybe it was too tall to see him on the ground as well. The skeleton stopped, standing directly over him. For a second, he thought that maybe he'd be okay, but then, with a great rattling rumble, the monster hunched down low, and the enormous skull appeared out of the haze, flying right towards him. He managed to dodge its gnashing teeth, but it caught his foot, sending him rolling through the radioactive dirt. Goro didn't give himself a moment to recover, though. He took off running as fast as he could, hearing the rattling sound terrifyingly close behind his back. You will be pleased to know that Watanabe Goro survived this incident. With only minor injuries, he managed to navigate his way to the nearest police station, where SCP agents, already familiar with the entity he had encountered, took control of the situation. The so-called starving skeletons had been roaming the bomb sites for several weeks by that point. It was the Foundation's first exposure to one of the oldest known entities that the IJA-MEA had been studying for years. To date, 206 separate instances of SCP-2863 have been officially recorded. However, the myth of the Gasha Dokoro had been circulating in various parts of Japan since the 10th century at least. Giant skeletons were said to haunt the sites of particularly deadly battles, hunting by night, and feeding on the blood of their human victims. These myths tally up with what the Foundation currently knows about these entities. Instances of SCP-2863 only appear after sunset and will lose all corporeality when exposed to sunlight in the morning, or any light source over 1.1 lux. To give you some reference for that, moonlight typically falls between 0.25 and 1 lux. A typical room with the light on will be 100 or even 1,000 times brighter. As you can imagine, this has made them virtually impossible to contain, as they manifest and unmanifest outside of controllable conditions. They seem to have continuous existence in some way, however, as previously neutralized instances can and will reappear later on. In folklore, the Gasha Dokoro are spirits that take control of skeletons. Some hesitant researchers have posited that perhaps the instances that dematerialize are returning to their spirit form. Little is understood about what that means in practice. What's more, this SCP cannot be photographed. All attempts to capture them on film or digital cameras have failed, including video tests. It is theorized that there is a link between them not appearing on camera and their disappearance when exposed to light. Again, the link between them is still mostly unknown. Due to a steady increase in urban development in Japan and ongoing peace in the region, appearances of this SCP are growing increasingly rare. While this marks a positive change for the people of Japan, it makes it even more difficult to study this SCP and learn how to prevent it in the future. The most recent fatality to occur at the bony hands of SCP-2863 happened in 2008, and it was part of a Foundation experiment. While most of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been redeveloped into bustling metropolitan areas, the outskirts of each city, particularly several parks, saw occasional instances of SCP-2863 appearing at night. As such, the SCP Foundation conducted a series of experiments under cover of nightfall, releasing D-Class personnel into a park in Hiroshima to observe how the SCPs hunted humans. Their enormous height, towering at over 30 meters, gave them a huge advantage, being able to chase people down with little difficulty. Another notable thing about them is just how quietly they move. There is a gentle rattling sound that follows them around, but aside from that, they are very light-footed and difficult to detect until they are right on top of you. This isn't helped by the fact that they hunt at night. As a result, they are remarkably quick at catching their prey. Once they have snatched their victims up in their skeletal fingers, they perform the same eating ritual every time. They eat the person and consume their blood. Initially confused by this finding, the Foundation was unsure where the blood was going, as the skeletons had no obvious digestive system. After the release of several more D-Class personnel into the park, they still weren't certain, but they believed that the SCP instances were absorbing the blood into their bones in some way. Further testing was requested, but denied due to the sheer number of D-Class fatalities in the area. They were starting to run out, and would have to ship more of them across to Japan, which was just a bit inconvenient for everyone involved. As the outskirts of those cities have been urbanized, the instances of SCP-2863 have reduced to the point that a smaller contingent of agents and researchers are now left in place. The light pollution from these areas is enough to prevent them from being able to manifest in the first place for the most part. Only on the rare occasion of power outages have Mobile Task Force 03 been deployed. Whilst researching this SCP, the Foundation came across an account from a shinobi in the 1700s. It was rare to find any kind of written document from a ninja for obvious reasons, but the account discovered painted a harrowing picture of just how much damage these yokai could inflict upon a city. The nameless shinobi first encountered SCP-2863 while assassinating an unnamed target in the mountains above his fishing town. Looking down on the fires below him, he saw human shapes walking through the smoke. dwarfing the buildings they moved between, before an instance charged through the trees straight at him. Diving out of the way, the shinobi quickly melted into the shadows. Both man and demon hunted one another throughout the night. He managed to climb onto its spine and inflict what he was certain would be a killing blow to the skeleton, only for his blade to bounce right off the bone. Caught and vulnerable for the first time in his life, the shinobi was helpless as the spirit threw him from its back into the courtyard and charged at him. It was only the hem of the ninja's sleeve catching fire from a candle that saved him. Just as the skeleton was about to bite down on his head, the light flared and the SCP disappeared entirely. For a long while, the man lay in the courtyard, pondering his actions. He should have died that night, yet he survived. Getting slowly to his feet, the man now knew what his destiny was. A monster that strikes from the shadows, scared of the light. He and the Gashodokoru were not so different. Understanding his target was the first step to defeating them. Snatching up a lantern from the ground, the shinobi descended the mountain into the wreckage of his hometown and defended his people. By night, he would emerge hunting down the Gashodokoru under the cover of darkness, banishing them with the light hidden under a dark sheet. The man fought night after night, narrowly risking death to save his people from the onslaught of the evil spirit. A small plaque was installed by the IJAMEA shortly before the Foundation took over the management of the SCP. It was installed at the foot of an old pagoda just outside a small fishing village. On it was a simple haiku: "Walking in shadow, in the midst of our demons, we will find the light."
All small towns have their horror stories. Tales of places plagued by terrifying apparitions, unseen forces, and something waiting in the shadows to terrorize unsuspecting innocents. Sometimes it's a bridge at the edge of town, where a man in a bunny suit stalks, wielding an axe and looking for drivers who wander off of the main road. Sometimes it's a cabin in the woods rumored to house an old gnarled witch who steals people away and throws them into a giant soup pot. Maybe it's a cursed hotel where wicked spirits roam the halls and the guests check in but never check out. Or maybe, like the little town where 16-year-old Mark lived, it's a haunted house. Ever since he was a little boy, Mark had been terrified of the house at the end of the lane. He walked past it on his way to school each morning and on his way back in the late afternoon. The sight of it made his palms sweat, his heart beat just a little bit faster. It had once been a grand Victorian manor, with turrets and a wraparound porch painted a brilliant white. But over the years, the paint had faded to a dingy yellow, peeling away from the rotting wood. There were holes in the roof where the rain and snow dripped through between the shingles. The windows were caked with dust and grime, obscuring anything that might be hiding inside. Not that there should have been anything there. The house had been abandoned for decades. Still, whenever he passed it, Mark could swear he felt the presence of something in there, pacing, watching, waiting for him to come inside. The stories around town didn't help. His parents told him to ignore them, said that people just liked to talk when there was nothing else to do, to make up things to be afraid of, because their lives were too boring otherwise. But he couldn't avoid it. On a Boy Scouts trip when he was 12, Mark had tried to cover his ears when the other boys gathered around the campfire with him and turned the topic to the old house, but they teased and taunted him until he listened. They leaned in, faces lit ghoulishly from below by the flickering orange flames, and whispered about the ghost that had taken up residence inside the house. A wealthy old woman had lived there a long, long time ago, they said. She was cruel, with a nasty temper. Everyone in town knew to avoid her, knowing she would throw things at them from her window, shout at them, even sick her guard dogs on them. But one group of boys in town couldn't resist giving her a good scare. They dressed up in all black, red devil masks covering their faces, and broke into her house late one night. When she awoke, they were standing at the foot of her bed, holding pitchforks and telling her that they had come to drag her to hell. Her heart stopped from pure terror at the sight. But her spirit lingered in the house, swearing revenge against anyone who ever dared cross her threshold again, especially teenage boys. Mark didn't sleep a wink the whole camping trip after hearing that. He swore then and there that no matter what, he would never go into that house. But everyone can be bought, and everyone has a price. For Mark, that price was a car. He had been saving up as best he could, but it was tough to get a job with no way to transport himself there, and mowing lawns for his neighbors wasn't the most lucrative gig. So when he learned that his neighbor Oliver, home on a break from college, was getting rid of his old car, he begged to buy it. He doubted Oliver would go for it, knowing what a jerk the guy could be, but to Mark's surprise, Oliver gave him an offer. "I'll tell you what." Oliver's face broke into a sadistic smile. "I'll give you the car if you can spend the whole night in the house at the end of the street, alone." "Are you serious?" Mark scoffed. "Dead serious. Make it to sunrise without freaking out and bailing, and the car's yours. We have a deal?" Oliver stuck out his hand to shake. Every nerve in Mark's body was screaming at him to say no, but if he didn't agree, he wouldn't be able to afford a car until he was in college. With a defeated sigh, he took Oliver's hand. "Deal." But as night fell and Mark prepared to meet Oliver outside of the derelict old house, he could feel pangs of regret deep in his stomach. What was he thinking? Was a car really worth living his worst nightmare? What if Oliver didn't honor the deal? Or worse, what if the stories were actually true? He swallowed the lump in his throat as he shoved a sandwich into his backpack. He had food, water, a blanket, a flashlight, and his phone. Everything he should need to survive the night. It would be fine, he hoped. "Wasn't sure if you'd show." Oliver smirked as Mark walked up to meet him on the rickety front porch. "Well, I did. I'm here." Mark fidgeted nervously, staring up at the house, its windows gazing down at him like large, dark eyes. "So here are the rules. You have to stay here until sunrise. You leave before then, the deal's off. No car for you. And you have to stay alone. No calling for help from your little friends or your mommy and daddy. I'll be back to check on you in the morning and make sure you really did it. Got it?" "Got it," Mark nodded. "Good luck." "I'm rooting for you." "Really?" Oliver turned to leave, then glanced over his shoulder for one final dig. "Oh, and watch out for the ghost. I heard if she gets you, there won't even be bones left over. Night!" And with that, he walked away. Mark stared down at the doorknob, preparing himself to walk inside. He could still leave. He could turn and run all the way back home, but then Oliver would be right, and he would be a coward. No, he was going to do it. He wasn't some scared little kid anymore. It was just a big, empty house, nothing more. He slowly turned the doorknob, pushed, and with a long, low creak, the door opened to the darkness within. Against his better judgment, Mark instinctively called out, "Hello?" There was, thankfully, no response, just his voice echoing in the vast, empty room. He let out a small sigh of relief and pulled the flashlight out of his backpack, switching it on. He cast its beam around the front room of the house, illuminating water damage, cobwebs that he could only hope were no longer housing any spiders, and a whole lot of plastic-wrapped furniture. As he walked into the living room, he was struck by just how ordinary it all seemed. It was creepy, of course, like any place made for living that had been deprived of its purpose for far too long, but it wasn't nearly as bad as his imagination had built it up to be. He had been picturing black candles, symbols drawn on the floor in blood, a skeleton perched on the couch, bats hanging from the ceiling. But there was none of that. No ghosts, no signs of danger. This was just mostly sort of sad. Once a home, now just a house, emptied out and left to decay. He could get through the night just fine. As soon as he thought that, he felt something scurry across his foot and let out a scream. The flashlight revealed it to be a large rat running from his sudden intrusion and looking for a place to hide. He clutched his chest, catching his breath. It's just an animal. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you, he reminded himself. Now that some of the mystery was gone, he was starting to wonder what the rest of the house looked like. What had once been breathless fear was replaced with a certain morbid curiosity. If he had to be here all night, he might as well explore. Hey, he thought to himself with a smile. Exposure therapy really works. Scared of a haunted house? Just go roaming around inside the middle of the night. You'll be cured. He sat his backpack down next to the stairs, keeping a grip on his flashlight, and began to investigate the rest of his greatest childhood fear. He walked through the dining room, taking in the ornate chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the long, long table fit for housing at least a dozen guests. He wandered into the kitchen, the appliances rusty from neglect. The oven and stove where someone once prepared their nightly dinners. All the pieces of life strewn about like an unfinished jigsaw puzzle with no one to pick up the pieces. Suddenly, Mark heard something coming from the other room. It couldn't be, but it sounded like footsteps on the stairs. Someone or something walking down, descending the staircase toward him. He held his breath, heart pounding so hard he couldn't hear it in his ears.
The footsteps stopped, and the house was silent once again. Then, slowly, deliberately, he heard the same footsteps heading back up until they faded away, too quiet to hear anymore. That wasn't his imagination. He was not alone in the house. Carefully, he tiptoed back the way he came, careful to not make too much noise walking across the creaking floorboards. When he reached the stairs, he saw no signs of anyone else. In fact, there was nothing there at all. Wait, where was his backpack? He scanned the floor, certain he had just overlooked it, forgetting where he set it down, but no matter where he looked, it wasn't there. His stomach dropped with a sudden realization. Whoever he had heard coming down the stairs must have taken it. He thought briefly about abandoning it and just running out the front door and never looking back, but his phone was in there. If his parents found out, he'd be grounded for months. Not to mention, he wouldn't have a phone. But what if whoever took it was dangerous? He couldn't be sure, but something in his gut told him he needed to go upstairs and check it out. He considered the weight of the flashlight in his hand. If someone attacked him, would it be enough to defend himself? He sure hoped so. With shaky hands and unsteady legs, he began to climb the stairs to the second floor of the house. Maybe whoever had taken his backpack was just as scared of him as he was of them. It was a comforting thought, though the comfort was short-lived. As he started down the upstairs hall, preparing to search the first bedroom, he heard a door creak open behind him. He turned and froze in wide-eyed terror at the sight. There was a figure there, emerging from the shadows. A pale woman with long, dark hair wearing a white nightgown, reaching out to him with a clawed hand. "Get out!" a voice rasped. Mark shrieked, dropped the flashlight, and tore back down the stairs. He ran to the front door, but as his hand touched the doorknob, a hand grabbed his ankle and pulled. He toppled over, landing on the ground with a painful thud. "Please," he sobbed, shaking from fear. "Don't hurt me. I'll leave. I'm so sorry. Don't kill me." He braced himself for an unearthly voice, for pain, but instead he heard gleeful cackling. He opened his eyes and saw Oliver standing above him. "I knew you couldn't do it. You're such a chicken," he smirked. "What?" Mark stammered. "Come on, did you really think I was going to give you my car? Are you stupid?" Oliver scoffed. Clearly, Mark followed the sound of the new voice coming down the stairs. There was Chase, one of Oliver's equally awful friends. "He still believes in haunted houses. Did you like my work? I made myself." He held up what Mark could now see was a prop, a mannequin dressed up like some kind of ghostly woman. "You gave it a good try, but I think it's time for you to run along home now," Oliver sneered. "Yeah, run home." Ugh! Chase's taunt was cut off as he fell against the banister suddenly. "What the hell? Who pushed me?" He whirled around, but there was no one on the stairs with him. Still, Mark could hear the sound of footsteps hammering past Chase and toward him and Oliver. What happened next shocked him to his core. Oliver was dragged to his feet by the collar of his shirt, pulled by an unseen force. Then, with a loud thwack, something invisible hit him square in the nose. "Ow!" he cried out, but before he could react anymore, he was dealt another blow to the stomach, doubling over in pain. "What the?" Something swept his legs out from under him and he fell hard, head hitting the floor with a crack. Then, it was quiet. Oliver was still breathing, but very much unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. "Screw this!" Chase yelled, bolting out the door. As Mark scrambled toward the door to follow him to run home before he could be attacked next, he saw his backpack sliding across the floor toward him. "Thanks for the sandwich," a female voice said, though he couldn't see the source. "I love peanut butter." "You're welcome," he stammered before grabbing his bag and sprinting all the way home. As the story of the haunted house began to spread, rumors and local news reports alike reached the ears of the SCP Foundation. Foundation staff in the area placed infrared cameras around the abandoned house, and the footage captured a human heat signature. Whatever was in that house, it was no ghost. Using infrared cameras to track the entity, it was quickly brought into custody. Before long, the entity was opening up to the Foundation, and she offered to cooperate willingly in exchange for warm food and shelter. So the invisible woman was taken to a nearby Foundation site and given the official classification SCP-347. SCP-347 is a young adult woman, standing at approximately 164 centimeters tall. For all intents and purposes, she is a completely average woman, with one exception: she is completely invisible to the naked eye. This includes her body, as well as everything inside of it, including her blood, skin, and hair samples.
Though the cones and rods of the human eye must be visible in order to see, SCP-347's vision has registered as normal following extensive tests. She refers to herself with the name Claudia, though this is assumed to be an alias inspired by Claudia Rains, the lead actor in The Invisible Man. Her real identity, if she indeed has one, has not yet been confirmed. Aside from her invisibility, SCP-347's only other notable traits are an ability to pick locks, a talent for thievery, and the ability to swallow small objects in order to turn them invisible, and then cough them up at a later time without any sickness or discomfort. She seems to crave human contact and socialization, becoming frustrated when she is ignored. She will act out in these cases by pranking people and rearranging and hiding their things. When she is left alone with someone who is sleeping, she has been known to stroke their hair, touch their face, or tuck them in. She does this, she says, because it just feels right. However, those it is done to tend to describe the behavior as unnerving. Though she is invisible in terms of visible light, she can still be seen using infrared or ultraviolet cameras. SCP-347 is currently contained at Site 1, kept in a 5-meter by 5-meter room monitored with an infrared camera. The room has an attached bathroom complete with a shower and bathtub, a queen-size bed, 2 armchairs, a desk and a swivel chair, several bookcases, a TV, and a DVD player. Her bookcases are filled with books, mainly adventure stories, romance novels, and art books, as per her request. She has also been permitted DVD copies of any movies or television shows that she asks for, as long as they predate her arrival at the SCP Foundation. New releases may be added, but only after prior approval from the research team. Though she does not frequently wear clothes, she is to be provided with any clothing that she requests, as well as a collection of makeup and wigs. She has been encouraged to dress up to her heart's content, as it allows Foundation staff to more easily gauge her location at any given time. While she is inside, the door to her room must remain locked. At least 2 staff members must check her door every hour for signs of tampering with the lock. The door may only be unlocked to allow staff in and out for interviews, research, and the delivery of meals and other requested items. She thoroughly enjoys human company and will chat, joke, and even flirt with those who visit her room. She is permitted to leave her containment if and only if she is accompanied by a staff member with at least level 2 security clearance, as well as wearing a layer of grease paint on her face and gloves on her hands. This allows the staff to see her hands and facial expressions. While she is out and about, staff are instructed to treat her with respect and avoid making any rude or crass comments about her invisibility, or her state of dress or undress. If she attempts to escape, she is to be returned to her room and locked inside. If the staff are unable to detect SCP-347's location, they will be given infrared heat vision goggles and instructed to keep an eye out for unusual phenomenon. Dr. Wrights added an addendum to her official file, warning male personnel to politely decline any advances that SCP-347 makes towards them. His note reads, "She's an invisible kleptomaniac. When you leave afterward, you're gonna realize 3 seconds too late that you don't have your keys in your pocket anymore, and you will be held accountable for whatever happens. Besides, the last thing we need is an invisible pregnancy." Dr. Wrights. Yeesh. When she was first contained, SCP-347 had regular violent outbursts and displayed signs of emotional instability, including compulsive theft and depressive episodes during which she would give all surrounding people the silent treatment. Her condition has improved gradually over time, with the application of regular counseling sessions intended to help her heal from the trauma caused by years of complete isolation and being unseen by the world around her. Several of the research staff studying Claudia have suggested that she be introduced to other SCPs, particularly those who are humanoid and considered to be non-threatening. She might, they posit, benefit from social interaction with other anomalous beings that she can relate and connect to. This, in addition to her therapy, could improve her mental and emotional state significantly. After all, just because she's invisible, that doesn't mean she has to feel invisible too. Claudia has expressed a great deal of interest in this idea, stating that it would be nice to have some friends on the inside who aren't being paid to talk to her. Though no matchups have been approved as of yet, several anomalies have been proposed should the program be put into action. SCP-507 was brought up in conversation by more than one researcher, given his harmless nature, friendly demeanor, and fascination with the paranormal. He supported the idea enthusiastically, stating that he would be thrilled to meet a real-life invisible person. SCP-343 has also asked to meet with Claudia,
believing he can potentially help her overcome some of her emotional difficulties and offer her some much-needed comfort. Other potential anomalies to introduce to Claudia include SCP-073 and SCP-056, though Claudia's flirtatious nature might complicate the latter. Everybody wants to be known, to be acknowledged, and recognized for the person that they know themselves to be. For SCP-347, it once seemed as if having that simple desire, that human need met, would be impossible for her. But now, for better or for worse, as long as she's in the custody of the SCP Foundation, Claudia can make something approximating a normal life. She can, at last, be seen.
Take a brief moment to think back to your younger years, spending long, tiresome hours trapped in a classroom, waiting to hear the noise of that final bell of the day. That sound meant freedom, the end of another grueling 6 hours at your desk, and the chance to get back to the warm sanctuary of home. If you were lucky, you might not have had to go far to get back to the safety and security of being in your parents' house. Living close enough to the school would mean you could easily walk home when the day was through. But your classmates? Well, they weren't all as lucky. Some of them had miles to travel, all the way across town even. Fortunately, though, the school bus would always be waiting outside at the end of each day, ready to take a gaggle of rowdy kids back home. And if you were one of those kids that had to take the bus, you'll know that the trip home after school was hardly a calm drive. Paper planes and spitballs firing from all directions, wads of chewing gum stuck to the undersides of seats, other kids all around you screaming and yelling at the top of their lungs. Still, it could be worse, right? No, trust us, it could be much, much worse than you can ever imagine. What if one day, the bus that picked you up from school wasn't a bus at all? What if instead, it was SCP-2086? Picture this. One day you get put in detention at school. Maybe you were disrupting a class or were caught spraying graffiti on the outside wall of the gym. Whatever the reason, we're sure you'll think it is unfair that you got held back after school, after everyone else had already gone home. But you do your time until finally you're told you can leave. Problem is, your house is on the other side of town, and you've already missed the bus. You make your way off the campus, down the nearest street. Maybe there's a city bus you can catch that'll get you back home. As you stroll away from your school, you realize that the nearest bus stop, the first one on the route home, seems to be further away than you remember it being. Must be just the exhaustion of a long day getting the better of you, playing tricks on your mind. It's not like someone could move the bus stop, right? Finally reaching the stop, you notice lights coming down the street after a few moments of waiting quietly. A late bus, just like you hoped for. It pulls up to the next stop, the doors folding open to allow you on board. It's totally empty, save for the driver, but straight away you notice there's something odd about him. He seems drained of color. His movements are weird, more like a puppet on strings than an actual living, breathing human being. Now that you think about it, if it wasn't for the fact he was clearly moving, driving the bus, you might assume that he was a corpse. Then again, maybe he just had a long day too. Taking a seat, you try not to think about it and stare out of the window in boredom. You watch as the route takes you past stop after stop, all of them empty just like the bus itself. But then something unexpected happens. You've ridden the bus to and from school so many times before that you can't help but notice when, for some reason, it takes a wrong turn. Looking out the window, you know you aren't mistaken. The driver has changed direction. Instead of heading towards the nearest stop to home, he's taken the bus towards the furthest edge of town. Desperately, you try yelling at him, asking why he's taken the wrong turn, but the driver stays still, as if he can't even hear what you're saying. That's when you notice the smell. You didn't catch it before, but now it's all around you, filling the air inside the bus. It's almost like the scent of disinfectant. The bus now smells the same way a hospital does. But that's not all. The more you breathe it in, the more you feel yourself starting to get woozy, arms and legs getting heavier. Everything around you feels as if it's spinning uncontrollably. Out of the windows, you can just about make out the sight of a junkyard, blurring in and out of focus. It's meant to be abandoned, and yet you're sure you can see movement. Massive, indeterminate shape shifting around in the dark. Finally, your vision goes dark and you fall unconscious onto the floor of the bus. Only you were never on the bus to begin with. No, although you didn't know it, you were prey to something that just looked like a bus, SCP-2086. And now that it's caught you, you'll never see the light of day again. Now, SCP-2086 doesn't just refer to a single creature, not by a long shot. It is the designation given to an entire species of arthropods. Think lobsters, crabs, and spiders, or insects like centipedes and millipedes, only much bigger. To the untrained eye, and depending on when you look, an instance of SCP-2086 will normally look like any ordinary public transport vehicle, of any make and model, or belonging to any company or transit authority. Usually, though, they look like regular old buses, at least while they're out foraging for food. When born, an SCP-2086 specimen will grow to full juvenile size within a week, usually weighing 200 kilograms or less. Full matured adult instances, however, can weigh approximately 17,000 kilograms. The adults are the ones that go out foraging, leaving the nest to collect food to then bring back to the juvenile SCP-2086s. And by food, we of course mean humans. While out on the roads, matured SCP-2086 creatures are practically identical to the auto vehicles that form their bodies. But the materials that this disguise is made from, the steel, plastic, wood, and glass, they're all actually comprised of specialized chitin, the kind of outer shell you'd find on most arthropods. But underneath that outer shell, that's where you'll find the real horror. Within the main chamber, beneath the flooring of the bus's long inner portion, is stored the pulsing, beating heart of an SCP-2086 specimen. And we don't mean that in a metaphorical sense. If you were to lift up the floorboards of one of these bus-like creatures, you'd see its heart, along with other vital organs like the creature's brain and stomach. What's more, the figure in the front seat that you thought was a living, breathing bus driver actually isn't living or breathing, not anymore. Preserved in a shell-like substance that the creature is able to produce, the driver is actually a human corpse, acting as a decoy for SCP-2086s. From within the bus body, fibrous appendages reach up into the corpse, almost like incredibly thin hairs. The creature can then use the cadaver essentially as a puppet with a dead person's body. That's how an SCP-2086 is able to move its driver around, making it appear more lifelike so it can lure its prey aboard. Think of it like the bioluminescent light that an anglerfish uses to tempt unsuspecting fish into their jaws. Same principle, but with a dramatically different result when it comes to SCP-2086. But if you thought bus creatures with internal organs under the floor and dead meat puppets in the driver's seat weren't creepy enough, there's still much more to SCP-2086s than meets the eye. For example, when they aren't out foraging, the adult creatures can unravel the roof of their bus-shaped outer shell. Underneath is a pair of wings, large enough and strong enough to carry their entire 7,000 kilos of weight off the ground and up into the air. As for eyes, the headlights at the front are, in actual fact, bioluminescent optical organs, allowing the creatures to see their prey even in the dark. Still not horrifying enough? Well, would knowing about their legs help? The wheels underneath an SCP-2086 specimen are also capable of unraveling, forming long gray or black legs like those of a spider. Yes, these are bus creatures with wings and multi-jointed legs. These legs aren't just big, clumsy appendages either. Compared with other arthropods, SCP-2086s are able to use their limbs to perform surprisingly intricate actions and finer levels of manipulations. For instance, a number of specimens have been observed in the wild by the SCP Foundation building shelters out of any materials that they can find near their nesting ground. And where do they normally nest? Wherever there's plenty of scrap metal and hardly any people to notice them. Junkyards are the preferred habitats of SCP-2086s, and where they will normally establish their colonies. While the juveniles remain within the confines of the colony, adult SCP-2086 specimens will leave to collect humans. Although on occasion, the younger specimens have been known to travel out from their nest and rearrange or relocate signposts for bus stops. They then place them in a route that leads them back towards their nesting ground. It's something worth remembering if your nearest bus stop ever seems to be a little further away from the school than usual. Afterward, the older specimens will travel along the route laid out by the juvenile SCP-2086s, picking up any human passengers that they find waiting at the relocated bus stops. They have to choose their moments wisely, with people boarding and disembarking from the bus usually every few stops. Once an SCP-2086 has as many humans on board as it can carry, with the certainty it won't lose any at the upcoming stop, it secretes a substance similar to chloroform. This fills the inner chamber of the bus, causing that noxious smell, like hospital disinfectant. The chloroform-like substance incapacitates all the passengers on board, rendering them unconscious and readying them to be taken back to the local SCP-2086 colony. Once the adult SCP-2086 has arrived at the junkyard, the juveniles will descend on it. Given their much smaller size, they will climb inside the mature specimen and forcibly remove each and every human passenger it is carrying within. Then comes the truly nasty part: feeding time. Each juvenile SCP-2086 will force their captive human through an orifice that is located under the front hood of their vehicle's shell. This sphincter, a circular formation of muscle that can expand and contract to perform a bodily function, is connected to where the steering wheel is found on an adult SCP-2086. The younger creatures will push their human prey through the sphincter, consuming them. Once this has occurred, those hairy appendages in the driver's seat will then latch onto the body of the now dead human, piercing through their skin, winding up and around their bones. These are the same fibrous hairs used to puppet the deceased corpse and use it to lure others aboard the bus. But these appendages have another function: they're feeding tubes. They will drain every last drop of blood from the SCP-2086's prey until the body is little more than a husk, at which point the tubes inject a saline solution directly into the cadaver. Afterwards, the inside of the bus fills with that same substance that preserves the corpse, and the process is complete. As horrifying as these creatures are, one of the few upsides of SCP-2086s is that they don't live very long. Female specimens will reproduce after 8 days and produce 20 offspring after this point. Each of these newborns reaches full maturity and size in about a week. On average, SCP-2086s live for 12 to 15 days. Another net positive is, because of their short lifespans, an SCP-2086 specimen doesn't need to feed on a human more than once, as the nutrients it absorbs as a juvenile are enough to sustain it through adulthood. Once it has matured, an SCP-2086 will go out into the nearest city or town to forage for humans, providing food to the next generation. And so the cycle continues. In the future, rather than taking the bus, maybe it's safer to walk. It might mean the difference between you making it home or becoming food.
40 years ago, a U.S. Navy exploratory vessel landed on a chain of islands in the South Atlantic, just 2,000 miles off the coast of Argentina. In other words, the middle of nowhere. Yet on this far-off set of rocks afloat in the middle of the ocean, they discovered a vast array of strange wildlife and plant species that resemble little of what they left behind on the mainland. Could this be a treasure trove of undiscovered species, they wondered? Hoping to capitalize on the discovery, a reconnaissance team of researchers was sent out to explore some of the islands on foot, and what they found did not disappoint. From endangered species of birds to plant life and vegetation that looked like it belonged on Mars, they found a dizzying array of new and exciting examples of evolutionary oddities that would fill a library. But unfortunately, their jubilation was cut short. Attempting to collect soil samples, they dug into the ground and soon discovered that what they were standing on wasn't actually ground at all. The Navy scientists soon discovered the rocky terrain they were exploring was actually made up entirely of organic matter. As per the standard protocol, the SCP Foundation was forced to silence the U.S. Navy research vessel after its discovery. With the okay from the U.S. government, the ship was torpedoed and sunk to the bottom of the ocean with all hands on deck, in the name of protecting the greater good of the masses. A tragedy at sea for the sake of preventing worldwide pandemonium. From there, the Foundation took over with the containment procedures of what would eventually come to be known as SCP-169, better known by its nickname, the Leviathan. The Leviathan is a biblical creature of mythical proportions
said to be able to boil the seas and create Earth-ending floods with just a whip of its massive continent-spanning body. It is unclear if SCP-169 has the ability to do these things, though, given its massive size, which Foundation researchers estimate to be somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 kilometers. It's easy to see how something that big moving at any speed could be devastating for the coastal regions of the world. Although we use the word contain, it is impossible for SCP staff to ever contain something of such massive size. Surveillance and monitoring are about all we can do for now. That and hope it never wakes up and decides that we're on the menu. It was thought to be relatively smooth sailing, until one incident changed everything. Dr. Hart turned off the video monitor and faced the assembled members of MTF Gamma 6, also known as the Deep Feeders, renowned for their specialization in the tracking of deep sea and oceanic anomalies. The room was dark, and each team member was sitting in shadow, but still Dr. Hart could see the seriousness on their faces. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here at such short notice," he said. On the screen behind him, he put up a NASA satellite picture of a small set of rocky islands. "You see this little island chain here? Well, it wasn't there a week ago." He paused, rubbing his forehead from lack of sleep. "At 8:05 a.m. today, we recorded another auditory anomaly emitting from SCP-169. This one was much louder and longer than the one recorded in 1997 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the one known as the Bloop. Back then, it was easy to brush off as some ice breaking off of a continental shelf and scraping against the seafloor. It's not so easy to cover up anymore. These auditory emissions from SCP-169 are beginning to grow more frequent. More than that, increased seismic activity around the archipelago on the creature's back indicates that the rate at which the creature is breathing is also up. Typically, the rate at which the creature takes what we are assuming to be a breath is once every 3 months. The rate has increased to once every 3 weeks. For as long as we've been monitoring SCP-169, it's been adrift along the southern Atlantic, never moving more than a kilometer a week. That behavior is slowly beginning to change. It doesn't sound like much, but something that big even moving just a fraction of that faster means 100-foot tidal waves for the entire South American coastline. We fear the creature is showing signs of waking up. If this is true, it could mean a cataclysm for the hundreds of nations around the world. Millions, hell, even billions could be wiped off the face of the Earth if this thing just flips its body too fast in the wrong direction. To put it to scale, this monster is about the size of the Caribbean, maybe even bigger as far as we know. The doctor then pulled out a decanter of whiskey and poured himself a glass, swallowing the entire pour in one go, in an appalling breach of workplace professionalism. Seriously, an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario is still no excuse for drinking on the job. We're talking about an extinction-level event. A bona fide XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. 1,000-foot tsunami waves stretching as far as the eye can see from either end of the horizon. The last time SCP-169 stirred, it created the Mediterranean. In fact, the legends of the biblical flood, Noah's Ark, the same story, can be found in every civilization and culture around the world. So maybe they were onto something. It is to this end I call you all here. To save the world from the next great flood. He paused for a moment as the room took in the gravity of the situation. The more we can learn about SCP-169, the better. And right now, we know squat. For one, we've never seen just how deep the body of the creature goes, or what's under it. The pressure has been too great for our current model submarines, until now. After reinforcing our Nemo-1 deep-sea submersible with thaumaturgical runes, the integrity of its hull has increased exponentially. Your mission will be to travel as far down and as close to the creature as possible. If it breathes, then there must be gills or lungs. There must be some basic biological facts we need to understand if we're going to survive extinction. Our only recourse is to find a way to sedate the creature, and if that doesn't work, then God help us all. Just 12 hours later, deep in the waters of the southern Atlantic, a massive submersible ship was diving down into the depths of the deep ocean, looking for a way to stop the end of the world. Agent Jia 6-1, a member of Deep Feeders, looked out of the massive viewing port as the ship slowly descended alongside the rocky trench that made up the body of SCP-169. Behind him was Dr. Hart, sporting a white 5 o'clock shadow, and a red nose from a night of drinking to calm his nerves. The entire crew were silent in awe as the giant floodlights of the ship brushed over the barnacle-covered surfaces of the undersea mountain. They progressed slowly, reaching each milestone in depth with caution, knowing that one wrong move could destabilize the pressure in their ship. Just 6-1 murmured the word, "Scales." "What?" asked Dr. Hart. "I've been watching the patterns of the ridges as we sink down. They look like scales, giant segments. It's hard to see at first because they're so covered in barnacles and sediment, but I'm sure of it. They're giant, armored scales, the way lobsters or crabs have armored exoskeletons." "Interesting," the doctor said, scratching his chin. "Arthropods have segmented armored bodies. This means we might be looking at some sort of evolutionary hybrid, some sort of aquatic mammal such as a whale or dolphin, one that has developed armored segmented scales similar to that of a crustacean." The doctor crossed his arms to think. "The closest thing we have on the fossil record of this magnitude is an armored fish from the Cretaceous period, but even that's way too small to compare to this. This thing has an entire ecosystem on its back." "How old is it?" asked the agent. "Well, now that you mention it, given the impossible age of the creature, an arthropod would make sense. Lobsters and other crustaceans don't age conventionally, you see. They are effectively immortal. In fact, they actually die because they continue to grow until their bodies can't hold up their humongous size anymore. And yet, SCP-169 just kept growing." The doctor trailed off, thinking to himself. Dr. Hart, still lost in thought, turned to walk to the back of the submersible as just 6-1 followed. He said as much to himself as to the agent, "The creature is old. The geological survey conducted when SCP-169 was first discovered carbon dated the specimen to over 541 million years old. As you can probably surmise, that's too old for any living being. The results had to be incorrect, and yet I checked them myself more than once. And numbers do not lie. The entity predates our civilization. Hell, it predates complex life forms on this planet as we know it. From an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't make any sense." The agent, confused, asked, "Doctor, how could something so big even come into existence?" "Very little of our planet is actually landmass. It's a wonder we call it Earth. Most of this planet is water. We aren't looking at a creature that's on our planet, Agent. We are on its planet." Just then a flurry of alarms and sensors began to go off at the bridge of the ship. The team scrambled to their stations, checking off monitors and shouting readings to each other. "The ship's thermal sensors are detecting a massive rise in temperature, transmitting power to cooling systems. We have activity northwest of our location. Sonar has something big headed our way. We need to dive now." The ship lurched forward, nose first, as everyone on board held on to their seats, the restraints keeping them from falling forward. Just outside of the viewing port, Dr. Hart could see an enormous scaled appendage moving fast in their location. "We need to steer the ship clear of the Talons. Revert all power to the thrusters. Get us out of the way," the doctor yelled. "Don't you think I'm doing that?" the captain shouted back. The ship jolted sideways and downwards as an immense wave of pressure came over the submersible, putting 6 Gs of force on its occupants. Just 6-1 yelped out of fear as the ship came close to crashing into what appeared to be the edge of a titanic talon, the size of the Empire State Building. Following the encounter, the part of the ship bordering the reinforced glass of the viewing port began to glow bright red. "It's boiling the water around us!" one of the crew members cried out. "It's not boiling anything, it's just cavitation due to the pressure reduction in the water. The updated runes on the ship's hull should keep us safe, we just need to cool our heads. Stay focused on the mission, bottom feeders." After several moments of holding their breaths, the crew of Nemo 1 began to relax as their pace returned to a slow descent along the side of the underwater behemoth. Before long, the vessel was no longer traveling straight down, but starting to curve under the creature, traveling north towards the theoretical head of SCP-169. After several hours, the ship came upon giant fissures in the rocky exterior of the creature. These massive vent-like structures appeared stiff, but slowly they opened and closed over the span of weeks. These were the respiratory organs of the organism. Clocking it at over 2 miles underneath the surface of the ocean, the crew carefully began entering the smaller pod-like submersibles that detached from their main ship. Just 6-1 entered his pod and strapped on the haptic gloves, that would give him control of the pod's robotic arms. He and a team of 3 other volunteers had agreed to undergo the dangerous mission of attaching artificial chemical emission machines that could be programmed to release anesthetic gas into SCP-169's respiratory system on command remotely. The emission machines could be refueled manually whenever the contents ran out. It was an ingenious solution Dr. Hart came up with when thinking of his time studying sharks as a marine biologist. They would tag the fins of sharks by capturing them and bringing the specimens on the deck of their boat. From there, the scientists would drill a radio frequency emitter onto the fin of the shark. When he had first seen this practice as a young college student, Dr. Hart was afraid the process was harming the shark, but later he learned it was designed in a way to not be harmful to the specimen, and eventually the tag would fall off after enough data on the shark's movement was collected. Except these tags would not be falling off, he thought. They could not. For the sake of all mankind, this had to work. The doctor pressed a button on the receiver of the radio and spoke. "J 6-1, what's your status? Pressure's holding, all signs look good. J 6-2? Pressure's holding, all good. J 6-3. All clear, Captain. J 6-4. There was silence. J 6-4, do you copy? All clear, Doc. Sorry, my mic was muted. En route and ready to do this thing. Dr. Hart sighed in relief and slowly reclined in his chair, watching the pods move closer to the large openings on SCP-169's side. One by one, the robotic arms used underwater torches to drill into the thick, rock-like exoskeleton of the creature, screwing in complex million-dollar equipment that was both waterproof and could withstand the immense pressure at such a depth under the ocean. As the minutes turned to hours, Dr. Hart couldn't help but feel anxiety for the safety of his crew and the success of the mission. But before long, the pods began to return one by one to the mothercraft, each completing the segment of work with which they were tasked. The last pod still working was J 6-1, whose robotic arm was in the process of rotating a large industrial-sized screw. J 6-1 had all but finished when suddenly a low rumble could be felt shaking the larger submersible. Dr. Hart's voice came crackling over the radio. "Get back to the ship now!" J 6-1, wrapped in deep focus on his task, replied, "I'm just about finished, just packing up my tool belt." "Leave it. Return to the ship now. That's an order." "Jesus, what's wrong? It's not like this is the end of the world," said the agent, chuckling over his radio. An ear-piercing echo sent shockwaves through the depths of the ocean around the submersible. The waves rumbled with the sound of SCP-169's voice, similar to the sound of a large whale, but amplified by a million. The sound sent all the crew members falling to the floor as the ship experienced severe damage from the burst of pressure, slightly cracking the glass viewport and sending smoke flooding into the small bridge of the ship. "Gas masks!" shouted Dr. Hart as they all donned breathing apparatus. "SCP-169 is waking up. Begin activation of the chemical emission machines. We need to sedate it now. The Leviathan is waking up. We need to stop it," shouted Dr. Hart. Just then, he looked back and noticed J 6-1's pod was gone. "J 6-1, what's your position? J 6-1, where are you?" "Sir, sonar has him drifting off deeper into the ocean behind us. He must have gotten knocked off SCP-169 by the shockwave." But Dr. Hart wouldn't have it. He didn't want any more blood on his hands. "Reverse thrusters, turn us around and get to him. We're not losing anyone." "But the breach in the hull!" "It'll hold. That's what the runes are for." The outside of the submersible began to glow a slight blue as the ship's system started to come back online to full capacity, and alarm systems started to turn off and report normal pressure readings. Before long, the Nemo 1 had caught up to J 6-1's pod and retrieved the agent, who had been knocked unconscious by the shockwave. Once the agent was back on the main ship, the doctor turned his attention back to the monitors, making sure the installations they drilled into the creature were functional. Slowly, the machines came online to full power, and the speed at which SCP-169 had been moving began to slow ever so slightly. The team all watched the viewport in silence as a steady stream of anesthetic gas was pumped into the respiratory system of the gigantic living myth in front of them. After a few moments of waiting, the doctor spoke. "I think it worked," he said with a smile. The crew erupted in cheers as they radioed control back up on land that the mission had been a success. The message quickly reached the O5 Council, where a red alert status was de-escalated, and the O5 members withdrew from their plan of leaving the current Earth for that of an alternate universe. The whole crew began to sing and celebrate the prevention of the end of the world, as Dr. Hart simply stood in front of the massive viewport, watching the mountainous specimen slowly grow smaller in the distance as the submersible began ascending back to the world above. Just 6-1 came over to congratulate him, patting him on the back. "We did it," he said. "Loosen up." The doctor managed to laugh along in acknowledgement. "That we did," he said in relief. "That we did." The two watched the deep blue ocean in silence, taking in the vastness of the sea. Perhaps this would not be the end of it, but that day, they had done what the SCP Foundation did best: kick that apocalyptic can a few miles down the road. And sometimes, in the face of the terrifying and the infinite, that's really the best you can do.
On March 15, 2011, Martin Sims was wandering down the streets of Carson, California. His clothes were ragged, he was filthy, and gibbering like a madman with a full beard and long, unkempt hair. His body was covered in scars, but he showed no signs of malnutrition. What made Martin's sudden appearance so remarkable? He'd been missing for 3 years. When he was interviewed by police, they asked him where he'd been all this time. They couldn't believe his answer. He'd been trapped in an IKEA since 2008, but this was no ordinary IKEA. This was a dangerous anomaly that would come to be known as SCP-2008. Martin's strange answers in his interview were laughed off by his interviewing officers, who assumed he was either crazy or under the influence of something, but they caught the attention of an SCP Foundation field agent embedded in the precinct. The report was passed up the chain to a local site director, who approved a detachment of Foundation field operatives to look into Martin's case. While he was reluctant to lead the Foundation agents back to the offending IKEA, the Foundation can be extremely persuasive. His screams of "Please, I'm begging you, don't take me back, don't make me go back," were noted but ultimately disregarded. When the SCP Foundation had triangulated the position of SCP-3008, which was indeed an active IKEA, the entire retail zone was closed and barricaded under the pretense of a severe black mold infestation. Armed Foundation personnel also arrived on the site shortly after, based on Martin's vague statements that there were creatures of some kind inside. Due to his deteriorating mental health, Martin was unable to provide a great deal of lucid information on the specific traits of SCP-3008. But one phrase he kept repeating was "bigger on the inside." Once researchers were satisfied that Martin had delivered all the pertinent information he was able to, he was administered Foundation amnestics to erase his memory of the last 3 years and return to his family. A cover story was formulated. Martin had been kidnapped and abused for 3 years by a mentally unbalanced stalker in downtown Carson. He'd been able to escape as said stalker took his own life out of guilt, a suicide that the Foundation expertly fabricated to make their cover story airtight. With the loose end of Martin Sims taken care of, the true observation of SCP-3008 could begin. A base set around the perimeter of the mysterious IKEA kept a 24-hour watch on the building, covering all potential entrances and exits. No exploratory missions had yet been approved by the Foundation Ethics Committee, so they first wanted to perform a week of external observation to see if any of the store's anomalous properties extended beyond the confines of the building. After a week of nothing, it appeared they did not. A local site director approved of the use of 20 disposable Class D personnel to explore the interior of SCP-3008. The D-Class operatives would be split into 4 squads of 5 men: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta Squad. Each would be assigned a different quadrant of the store and would deliver information back to the control team on site via a live audio and video link. 3 of the 4 teams upon entering the store reported nothing out of the ordinary. Neither the audio or video they were sending back indicated anything different from a standard IKEA store, from the flat-pack wardrobes to the Swedish meatballs. Team Delta, however, suddenly began experiencing a scrambled audio and video connection. Shortly after, communication with Team Delta dropped off entirely. They disappeared somewhere inside the store and haven't been seen since, with one notable exception. After the disappearance and the extraction of teams, Foundation researchers classified SCP-3008 as Euclid because its anomalous properties were at least confined to the interior of the store, and even then seemingly not the entire interior. The anomalous area within SCP-3008 became known as SCP-3008-1, and containment appeared to be 100% secure. There was no telling how many people had already gone missing in the store over the years, but the disappearances must be stopped. The Foundation maintained constant surveillance around the perimeter of SCP-3008, but it appeared they could prevent any further incidents by simply preventing other civilians from accessing the IKEA store. Martin's ravings about monsters were assumed to just be the product of delirium, until a surviving member of Delta Team suddenly reappeared. The date was November 3rd, 2011. It was a cold night. A few hours hours after what would have been closing time if the store were still active, and 7 months after the extraction teams had disappeared somewhere in the confines of SCP-3008. There had been no anomalous activity outside the store since the perimeter was first secured, and the Foundation researchers hadn't expected that to change until the last surviving member of Delta Team came barging out of the store's entrance. Startled field operatives were amazed to see him again, but they were even more amazed to see what was following him out of the store, repeating the same phrase, "The store is now closed, please exit the building." Despite the fact that the entity chasing the Delta Team survivor was wearing the yellow shirt and blue pants of an IKEA store employee, the being definitely was not human. It was around 7 feet tall with no visible face. The entity had grossly extended limbs, with each arm being around 5 or 6 feet long and ending in a huge oversized hand. The whole process was so sudden that the field agents present at the perimeter weren't able to save the Delta Team survivor, as the entity reached forward with his freakishly long arms, grabbed him and twisted his head off like a child with a doll. The field operatives present drew their weapons and peppered the entity with bullets. It would later be classified as SCP-3008-2. The being appeared to collapse and die from the physical trauma, at which point it and the body of the former Delta Team survivor were taken for an autopsy by Foundation researchers. There were no biological abnormalities of the body of the Delta Team survivor, so it did not appear that the anomalous properties of SCP-3008-1 had any effect on the physiology of its occupants. He was not malnourished despite being missing for months, and the contents of his stomach looked to be half-digested food consistent with the menu of a typical IKEA store restaurant. SCP-3008-2, on the other hand, raised a number of perplexing biological questions. The autopsy revealed that the creature's clothes were actually part of its body, like an additional layer of skin. The creature lacked blood or any kind of vascular system. Even stranger, the entity didn't appear to have bones or internal organs, not even a brain or nervous system. It was a being made entirely of skin all the way to its core. How it was able to move, or even live for that matter, remains a mystery. Though when you work for the SCP Foundation, you learn to accept that some things will always remain unexplained. One thing was certain though, Martin Sims was right about his monsters. After the incident with Delta Team, the Foundation deemed that sending manned explorations into the heart of SCP-3008 was too much of a liability and planned a series of drone-based reconnaissance missions into the anomaly. The first of these drones experienced connection issues and failed when attempting to venture into the IKEA's anomalous zone. However, after a lengthy period of trial and error, the Foundation was able to establish a more secure connection with its drones, even when deep into the SCP-3008-1 anomalous zone. It was only then that some of the most extraordinary discoveries were made. SCP-3008-1 seemed to break the laws of spatial reality, as the area of the IKEA's interior was at least an order of magnitude larger than its exterior. Just as Martin Sims had said, it was bigger on the inside, but just how much bigger? The Foundation has yet to find evidence of any physical terminators within the store that might indicate SCP-3008-1 has an endpoint, while an area of at least 10 kilometers squared has been uncovered in SCP-3008-1. It could, in theory, be infinite. Laser rangefinder tests, which are normally very reliable, have only given inconclusive results. Interestingly, the anomalous area doesn't have any clear visual differences from the rest of the IKEA store, except that it extends forever. An individual trapped within the confines of SCP-3008-1 wouldn't even realize they've entered an anomalous zone until they tried to locate an exit and leave, at which point they'd find they were already hopelessly lost. The geography of SCP-3008-1 does at least appear to be consistent, so people trapped within are theoretically able to retrace their steps and escape if they haven't already ventured too deep. According to data collected during the drone reconnaissance missions, SCP-3008-2, of which there appear to be a vast population, would wander the stores aimlessly during the day. They are unresponsive to the drone's presence and did not appear to be aggressive. While the physical descriptions of these creatures could vary slightly, they all follow the same overall trend. Clothes consistent with an IKEA uniform, no face, either seemingly too tall or too short, and limbs that are grossly out of proportion with their bodies. As the Foundation began sending drones deeper into SCP-3008-1, they found another incredible discovery. There was an unknown population of humans trapped inside IKEA's anomalous zone, and these people had used the IKEA furniture around them to create entire settlements and towns within the store. There were several of these towns, all of which seemed to cohabitate peacefully. Even Foundation personnel found this development in their research to be truly extraordinary. Since SCP-3008 was first identified, there have been only 14 civilian escapes. Some had been trapped inside for months, others had been in there for years, some far longer than Martin's 3-year stint. while every one of these escapees has eventually been released back to their home after a liberal application of amnestics and a proper cover story has been devised, the Foundation interviewed each of them extensively first. According to each of these escapees, the people trapped inside the IKEA have built an entirely new society across the various settlements. Contrary to the Lord of the Flies expectations of a group of people isolated and afraid, there's immense cooperation between the trapped civilians. The food in the several IKEA restaurants in SCP-2088-1 mysteriously replenishes while nobody's there, so there's no threat of starving, and the automatic turning on and off of the lights forms as a rudimentary kind of day and night cycle. Nighttime, however, is when things get dangerous, as the SCP-3008-2 entities, which are known to the people inside as the staff, become extremely hostile after dark. Aggressive hordes of the staff swarm the settlements at night, repeating, "This door is now closed, please exit the building." The civilians inside are usually able to repel these attacks with minimal casualties, but the constant war of attrition slowly wears down those inside. The bodies of the creatures also need to be removed from the area after each attack, as the presence of corpses or even parts of corpses has been known to heighten the ferocity of the next night's attack. During the day, the staff return to a docile and unresponsive state, though they'll still defend themselves violently if anyone dares to attack. Over the course of the interviews with the 14 escapees, Foundation researchers were able to answer another of their key questions. How had so many people gone missing in the store for so long without being noticed? But the answer they received only raised many more unsettling queries. According to the escapees, there were people inside the settlements that, despite being otherwise of entirely sound mind and standard intelligence, seemed to lack very common knowledge that even a child should know. For example, some of them weren't aware of the International Space Station orbiting the Earth, or stranger still, the existence of the Statue of Liberty. This led the researchers to a frightening conclusion. SCP-3008-1 may not only be a nexus point of multiple IKEA stores in our dimension, it could be connected to IKEAs in every dimension where IKEAs exist. While it only abducts a handful of people from each store over an extended period of time, it suddenly becomes clear how this SCP was able to trap so many people without detection over such a long period of time, which in turn led to an even more terrifying revelation. The SCP Foundation may not have SCP-3008-1 as contained as they thought. It might even be tucked away in an IKEA store somewhere near you, just waiting for you to visit. After all, there's always room for one more.
We were a team. Despite our differences, in spite of the terrible things they'd done, we were still a team. That's not how the higher-ups saw it, though. No. The guys upstairs with their perfectly pressed shirts. For them, we were judged by our level of expendability, and they knew that our next mission was a death sentence. One by one, that thing took out my team, my friends, snapping their necks so quickly and with such ease that no sooner did I hear the scream, they were dead. We had been used. I'd been used. Delivered as prey to the predator. A plot that was sanctioned by the bosses and approved with a blood-red stamp. Why did they do it? I'm still trying to figure that out. Maybe that's something you can tell me after you hear how these so-called scientific men left us in this cell. And in the hands of SCP-173. For me, it had been the best of times before it became the worst of times. The best, because I'd quickly risen through the ranks of the facility. The worst because, well, I'll get to that. I was never the best student. I finished high school by the skin of my teeth, and my job prospects looked bleak. But I was lucky, I guess. Or at least I thought so at the time. You see, I have an uncle Siegfried who did some work for the government. I never actually knew what he did, just that it was secretive work. I used to imagine he was some sort of super spy, so you can imagine how excited I was when he found out I needed a job and he offered to help me out. I couldn't believe it. I always thought he hated me. I'd overheard him telling my parents that I was a no-good deadbeat, but now he'd had a change of heart and was willing to take me under his wing. What would I get to do? Undercover intelligence gathering? International assassinations? Just you wait, he said. And that's how I found myself walking into a sprawling, futuristic-looking facility where they handed me a level 1 security clearance card with big, bold letters that read, Janitor. But I was happy. Just the words security clearance made me feel important, and it beat flipping burgers. I pushed mops, turned off lights, fired up generators, clocked in and clocked out. But all that time they must have been watching me, grooming me, waiting for the day they could throw me to the wolves. I should have known. I've always been an expendable kind of guy. After a few years, I was called to an office, and there was a man in a plaid shirt and kind of a tweed jacket that professors wear. He asked me, "Do you have any idea about what we actually do here?" And to be honest, I didn't. I knew that there were many parts of the facility I couldn't enter. I imagined that down a maze of corridors were weapons being built, or prisoners being interrogated. But I had no idea about the anomalies. How could I? Before I was told anything, I had to sign a bunch of forms. There were so many I thought I'd get to find out who really killed JFK. And while they didn't come out and say it, what I inferred was that if I ever talk about what happens at the facility to someone outside the facility, well, let's just say it's not the kind of thing they'd spell out on a piece of paper, but it involves padded cells and rusty tools. I wasn't scared though. I was part of something big, something secret, and I loved it. So I signed my life away with no hesitation. Soon after, I was introduced to my first anomaly, the safe class, of course. They took me to an observation room, and from that room I could see into another room with a sign on the wall that read SCP-067. I just stood there, waiting for something to happen, when in walked another guy in a white lab coat. "Welcome to your first anomaly," he said. "Is it okay if I hook you up to this heart monitor? We want to gauge your reaction to what you see." "All I can see," I told him, "is an empty room with a table and what looks like a pen on top of some papers." "Correct," he said, half smiling, as if I was some kind of idiot. "That's SCP-067. I thought about telling him that if I needed years of training before I could see a pen, that I probably should have taken that fast food job. Could have been a shift manager by now. Then they brought a young chimpanzee into the room, small enough to be harmless. One of the guys forced a pen into the scared chimp's hand and something strange happened. It started scribbling. Nonsense at first, but suddenly it was sketching and drawing faster and faster. I could catch glimpses of words and images. By the time they dragged it out, it was flailing around like it was possessed. "That pen has power," said the man in the lab coat. "A power whose source or origin we don't fully understand. That's why we're here. That's why you are here." One of the guys in the other room held the chimp's drawing up to the window. It was a perfect sketch of the Tower of London, intricate and brilliant. Above the sketch was the title, "Tower of London, Tudor Period, circa 1541. The year Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury, lost her head on the chopping block." Underneath that, the chimp had written, "Pity, she was no traitor. Take it from me, I was there." They didn't need to look at the heart rate monitor to see that I was shocked. That was far from the only anomaly I'd come into contact with, and I must have been doing something right, because in time I went from level 1 to 2 to level 3 security clearance, and that's when they made me a containment specialist. I won't bore you with all the details, but as you can guess, I dealt with the containment of anomalies. A lot of my time was spent looking through small windows and cell doors, making sure that whatever was inside was still inside and still in one piece. Other times I worked with field agents when anomalies were brought in, a transition period that the arrested freaks didn't much like. There was one certain anomaly, though, that I was tasked to oversee on many occasions. I like to think of it as my pet, but in hindsight, I was its pet. This was SCP-173, something that was in what we call the Euclid class, a classification meaning that we don't fully understand it, but know it is very dangerous. We know it's intelligent, we know it's unpredictable, and we know it will kill. And for that reason, there's people tasked with containing it and keeping an eye on it at all times. At first glance, you wouldn't guess just how dangerous 173 is. You wouldn't think it's incredibly intelligent. In fact, you'd think the opposite. That's because it's more or less a walking slab of concrete and rebar with stunted limbs and traces of spray paint that give the impression of a dopey face. We have to enter its cell twice a week for cleaning duties. It leaves a disgusting, foul-smelling liquid on the floor, a reddish-brown substance that I can only describe as a mix of blood and waste products. Where that stuff comes from has remained a mystery since we first contained it in 1993. Going into the cell was always a three-man job, because, and this is maybe the weirdest part about 173, it can't move if human eyes are watching it. That's why you need at least 2 people watching it at all times. If you were in the room watching 173 by yourself and blinked, you'd be dead before your eyes opened. We don't know how it moves that fast, but in that fraction of a second, your neck is snapped so hard it's almost like being decapitated. I've seen the videos to prove it. All it took was a sneeze. He wasn't even finished getting the rest of the achoo out when there was a flash, and his partner was left lying on the ground. His head twisted around the wrong direction. So, you can understand why we now require 3 men for any time we must enter 173's cell. Then, a few months ago, I was told that a long process would begin to train and re-educate some future Class Ds. Class Ds are mostly prisoners with lifelong sentences, or those we've taken from death row and given a new lease on life. We were apparently understaffed, so why not employ these men whose lives had pretty much ended anyway? That was the rationale, or at least that's what they told me. I was told to train them on their new job, mopping up 173's mess, so that me and the rest of the containment specialists could focus on more important tasks. They hadn't been through the training I had, seen what I had seen. But after showing them the video of 173 nearly taking off a man's head, they were more than willing to follow the rules. They understood not to blink or turn away or sneeze, and that any lapse in focus could lead to a violent death. So I started to show them the ropes, how we move as a team into the cell, and always keep the others informed on what we're doing. 173 was always sitting in the corner of a cell, no expression on that crude face. But when we walked in its cell, I got the feeling it knew something had changed. I felt almost as if it was communicating with me, but I couldn't tell what it was trying to say. And then, it happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days from the last time we'd cleaned. As usual, 173 had covered the floor with that horrible liquid. We headed in to clean, my new team alert as always, and some of them cleaned while others kept their eyes focused on the thing in the corner. Things were going smoothly when we heard a noise I knew very well. It was the sound of the cell door locking. Someone must have screwed up. "Hey guys, we're locked in here," I shouted through the intercom. Nothing. "Guys, the damn door is locked." Nothing. I lost it a bit. "Open the door, will you?" Nothing. My team looked at me. The ones not on eye contact duty, that is, as if I should know what to do, hoping that this had happened before and that there was some kind of standard plan to deal with it. There wasn't. We were always observed when in the room, and I knew that a technician couldn't accidentally lock the door. It was impossible. There were protocols. Someone had done this on purpose. The 4 of us sat in the corner of the room as far from 173 as possible, our eyes locked on it. It didn't move an inch as usual, just stood, staring at the wall as it always did. We stayed awake through the night, talking a little, holding on to the slim hope that something had gone wrong. But as night turned to day again, we all began to lose hope. We weren't sent here to clean. We were a test. Totally expendable. Lab rats. But I wouldn't go down without a fight. We couldn't just stay up forever. That was a death sentence. I suggested that 2 of us stand, 1 sit and rest, and 1 get some sleep. We'd take shifts. A couple hours on, a couple hours off. Maybe we could show that we wouldn't give up. They'd have time to realize what they were doing was insane, call off the test, and come free us. We made it through a couple of shifts like this, and it seemed like we'd actually be able to make it another day or 2 when everything went wrong. It was my turn to sit and rest when I heard the worst possible noise. Snoring. The con next to me was sleeping quietly, so it must be one of the standers. I glanced over for just a split second and saw both of them, leaning against the cell wall, dozing. At the same time, I saw the flash. Crack, snap, pop. One after another, their necks were snapped. I'm not sure how it happened, but I was standing again, staring at 173, who was now in the corner. Dead bodies with their heads twisted around piled up in front of it. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stare at this thing forever. I felt myself giving up. I lowered my head to the ground and then finally broke my gaze, ready to die. And then, nothing happened. I slowly raised my head back up and there it was, its hideous face inches away from mine. It was then that I understood what we'd been containing, what we'd underestimated. I felt it again, like it was telling me something. It was telling me to close my eyes, to sleep. So I did. But as my eyes closed, I didn't see darkness. I saw 173, or something like it, but not in the cell. I saw it outside, in the world, standing over children sleeping in their beds, watching. I saw them hiding in the shadows, staring out at passers-by. Then I realized they weren't watching, waiting to pounce. No, they were hiding. My eyes popped open as the door opened and in rushed 6 security personnel. They took me outside, jabbed my leg with a syringe, injecting me with something as the world faded away. Incident report. Time and date redacted. Following the experimental forced interaction with Euclid-class anomaly SCP-173, subject has ceased responding to external stimuli and appears to have taken on the traits and behaviors of the anomaly. Subject now spends entire day sitting in corner of cell staring at the wall. Staff are advised to proceed with caution when dealing with subject, as the only behavior they engage in is an attempt to strangle anyone who enters the cell. No treatments have shown any effectiveness, and subject will unfortunately require incarceration, likely forever. It was all over. The end was nigh. From the perspective of people on the ground, an enormous mass filled the sky, blotting out the sunlight. Around the world, people caught only glimpses, horrifying fragments of a much larger whole. A jagged tooth, larger than any mountain, tentacles writhing, shifting, each one wider than entire cities. The view from space was no less terrifying. Spied by a Foundation probe, the enormous creature bigger than the Earth itself emerged into existence. SCP-2440, the Sealed King, was free. He'd been awaiting this day for millennia, gradually infecting the minds of human beings throughout the ages. The only hindrance was the tireless work of the SCP Foundation. They had to carefully control the spread of any information about SCP-2440 in order to stop his return. And yet, they'd failed. Suddenly, something ripped across the sky, a tail of fire arcing out behind it as it flew upwards towards the colossal monstrosity emerging out in space. It looked like a bright, burning fireball to all the onlookers cowering in the streets below. It was dwarfed in scale by the enormity of the Sealed King, only appearing to get smaller and smaller by comparison the further it flew. This wasn't a missile, nor a conventional weapon of any kind. It was humanity's last hope, a guardian angel. SCP-001 streaked through the air, burning brighter than ever before, its flaming sword poised ready to strike as it homed in on its target. It parted clouds as it climbed higher, the usual cold of moisture in the upper atmosphere turning to steam seconds before the Gate Guardian even passed by. The heat of its flames needed to be hot enough to kill SCP-2440, putting enough power behind its strike to fell one of the few creatures that could withstand the Guardian's burning blade. There would only be one shot at this. Mimetic infections had been spreading like wildfire. Whenever the SCP Foundation encountered information about SCP-2440, just as they had managed to suppress it, a new case would pop up somewhere else. Underground cults were uncovered preaching the so-called benevolence of Ziltla on one side of the world. Just as Foundation teams moved in, dosing members with amnestics to erase all memory of the Sealed King's false promises, a new threat would emerge. This time it wasn't a temple or a gathering, it was a forum, created anonymously on the deep web halfway across the globe, filled with cryptic discussions and coded rituals, each post aimed at one goal, bringing about the return of SCP-2440. There was only one explanation. There had to have been some kind of leak within the Foundation, and it needed to be plugged. One of the agents worked on containing information about SCP-2440 before it created a potential problem. Meanwhile, another unit was tasked to come up with a solution in the event the spread of hazardous knowledge could not be contained. SCP-2440 was a mimetic parasite, only capable of manifesting if enough people became aware of his existence. The more people learned about him, the stronger he became. And in the event that the Sealed King was able to fully manifest in reality, then it would cause an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. In order to protect against that outcome, the Foundation needed to better understand SCP-2440. They could control the spread of information about him within their own organization through the administering of amnestics. But if they weren't able to stop the Sealed King from manifesting, then they needed a way to fight him. They knew he was considered to be one of the old gods. This was a group of mostly malevolent entities from the beginning of creation, who disregarded all forms of life, and were responsible for some of the numerous anomalies the Foundation had encountered and contained over the years. And it was exactly these anomalies that the Foundation would be looking to for help now. The Gate Guardian departed the Earth, breaking through the outer atmosphere, the airless vacuum of space unable to stop its fiery body and weapon from burning. Though it was moving far faster than any human could perceive, these nanoseconds were the longest it had ever left its post for, leaving the gate with no one to defend it, but it was necessary. An attack on reality would threaten the safety of the paradise that lay beyond the gate. SCP-001 was sworn to protect that plane, no matter the cost. As it flew through the stars, shapes clawed out of the dark, parting the fabric between reality and non-existence, allowing SCP-2440 to arrive. But the Gate Guardian didn't fly straight for the Sealed King. Instead, it traveled over 90 million miles from Earth, heading right towards the burning ball of gases that lit the side of the tiny blue planet facing it. Even at its colossal height, the Gate Guardian was so small when compared to the enormity of the sun. Sensing the looming form of the Sealed King moving towards the Earth, SCP-001 raised its flaming sword, its blade pointed towards the surface of the sun. Searing flames were pulled into the weapon, absorbed and added to its already formidable fire. The sword was often said to rival the burning of the sun itself, though never caused any damage to the area surrounding it, unless SCP-001 wielded it in a retaliatory attack. But being as hot as the sun wouldn't be enough to drive the Sealed King back. The Gate Guardian needed its sword to be hot enough to erase SCP-2440 from existence. The investigation into the leaking of information about the Sealed King had gone worse than anyone could have foreseen. An entire cult of people infected by knowledge of Zyotla managed to spread the word to almost 1,500 people, enough for many of them to begin hearing SCP-2440's commands in their minds. The entity had convinced its new followers that it was the only true loving God, that humanity and all creatures beneath him would bask in the adoration of the Sealed King if he was able to return. The Foundation knew the truth, though. SCP-2440 had manifested once before, and his disregard for human life was apparent when he tried to destroy the world. Agents were trying to gather up as many of the cultists as they could and convince them of the truth, but many wouldn't listen. Those that did refused to believe what they thought were the words of false prophets. Others ran from the Foundation, spreading the word to anyone and everyone that they saw. It didn't matter if people believed or even if they devoted themselves to Zyotla. Just making them know about him was enough. And if that wasn't enough to contend with, the rest of the Foundation had difficulty finding a suitable protector in the event that SCP-2440 arrived. They had realized quickly, as more information about him spread, that the Sealed King would be getting more powerful. This meant that any anomaly they enlisted to help could potentially fall under SCP-2440's control, if the Foundation told them what they were up against. SCP-343 was offered the job, but he declined, saying that he couldn't be bothered to get involved. It was about time humanity looked after itself instead of calling on him all the time. SCP-682 could never be reasoned with, and while it hated all forms of life, it would probably welcome the destruction of humanity. The Foundation needed someone pure, incorruptible, and most of all, someone they could convince to be on their side, an anomaly whose goals would require the world to stay intact. Then someone suggested SCP-001. It made sense. The Gate Guardian existed to protect the entrance to paradise, and had wrought massive amounts of destruction to anyone that had attempted to attack it. The problem was, the Foundation couldn't just wait for Zyotla to arrive and launch a strike at the Guardian. Too many would die before then, unless they could convince SCP-001 that the attack had already happened. In a bold move, the O5 Council cleared the Foundation to release all information about SCP-2440 among themselves and the public. TV channels, news websites, social media platforms were flooded with information about the Sealed King. Their goal was to infect between 100,000 to 1 million people with the mimetic information to intentionally cause SCP-2440 to manifest. Sure enough, it worked, and Zyotla began to emerge. But while they'd be bringing about his arrival, the Foundation were ready to roll out the welcome wagon. They'd approach the Gate Guardian, presenting it with a single word, the same command that it had spoken to a lone physicist many years ago. Prepare. And just as they'd hoped, SCP-001 interpreted the information about SCP-2440 becoming known as a preemptive attack, and one that threatened its mission. The Guardian had no choice but to fight back, soaring up from its post to meet the Sealed King as he arrived. Fire pulled directly from the sun, SCP-001 shot across space, moving so fast it could barely be seen by the advanced telescopes aboard the Foundation's satellites. Though SCP-2440 wasn't bound by the same rules as mortals, reality could be anything he wanted it to, and as soon as he arrived, he allowed himself to move as fast as the Guardian. But he couldn't prepare for the first sword strike. The searing heat burned as SCP-2440 tried to block the oncoming attack, the molecules of his physical form burning so hot that they disintegrated entirely on contact. He evaded each swing, trying to move space and alter the flow of time around them both to prepare the Gate Guardian from landing another attack. Even then, he was barely evading. SCP-001 was still just as fast as ever. The Gate Guardian's sword was burning hot enough to cleave SCP-2440 out of existence itself, like cutting the mold from a piece of fruit. Each swing of the fiery blade landed with the searing scorch of a supernova. In several seconds, the Sealed King would be no more, not just driven out of this universe, but removed from existence entirely. With his defeat imminent, there was only one move left. The mold might be cut away, but it could still spread, invisible, yet ever present. With the last fading fragment of his power, SCP-2440 bent reality to his whims. It was so tiny, so seemingly inconsequential, that it managed to slip by SCP-001 and the SCP Foundation undetected. In an instant, the change was made, and Xiotla was pleased. He stopped trying to deflect the Gate Guardian's strikes, instead lowering his guard and opening himself up for the final blow. The Guardian sword plunged into the heart of the Sealed King, causing him to erupt in a cosmic fireball that burst across the stars. From Earth, the force of the explosion caused huge tidal waves in the ocean, shattered windows in major cities, and a deafening crack louder than any thunderstorm in history was heard by every living person. Looking into the sky, even from the dark side of the Earth facing away from the sun, people saw something huge, a raging inferno high above them, like a second sun had been ignited. But the Foundation started receiving alerts from their deep space probes. The heat from the resultant explosion was heading towards Earth. The readings were astronomically high, and panic set in. The end of the world scenario had not been averted. It had just changed. In moments, it would incinerate the planet, burning the atmosphere away and boiling the oceans, after it immolated every animal, every plant, every building, and every last human being. There was nothing anyone could do to stop the shockwave of fire rippling across space. Nothing any mortal could do, at least. As the Foundation and the world watched the oncoming wall of flames, it suddenly receded, as if being pulled back faster than it was approaching. The fire was sucked away in a giant vortex. SCP-001's sword was being held aloft, the supernova it had created being drawn back into the blade, absorbed into the Guardian's weapon, until the flames were gone. They were now part of the anomalous entity. In the blink of an eye, SCP-001 had vanished from out in space. Having returned to its post, it resumed its watch, as vigilant as ever in protecting the entryway to paradise. It had no idea it had failed in its mission, though. The change the Sealed King made would stay small and undetected, but it set in, the mold taking root in reality. His godlike powers had never really been his true strength. The real power had always been his influence over the minds of mortals. As long as some scrap of information about him survived, SCP-2440 would live on, and possibly even return to reality again one day, this time to subjugate it once and for all. Before the Gate Guardian had landed the killing strike, the Sealed King had managed to hide details about himself in the minds of a few mortals. Not all of them understood. Many didn't even know they'd been chosen. But some did, realizing what they had to do. They labored in the dark. Those who'd received the slivers of knowledge about Xiotla began to believe it. What had once seemed like fiction to them began to feel like it had happened for real. The Foundation and the Gate Guardian had struck the Sealed King down, and his new believers sought to restore him. Maybe they started to tell the story of SCP-2440's confrontation with SCP-001. If enough people heard it, learned about the Sealed King, then he could rise again. Maybe some of them even turn it into a YouTube video.
Have you ever seen the animated show The Real Adventures in Capitalism? No, you haven't. Even if you think you have, you haven't. It's okay, we remember it too. But as far as the SCP Foundation has been able to determine, the show never actually aired. According to its official Foundation file, The Real Adventures in Capitalism is a memetic condition which consists of spontaneously occurring false memories of the aforementioned show. According to information gathered from various affected individuals, The Real Adventures in Capitalism began airing in late 2013 and stopped in spring of 2018, and consists of two 13-episode seasons. All persons and events depicted in The Real Adventures in Capitalism are believed to be fictitious. Just in case you haven't been affected by this memetic condition or only recall certain portions, then this video will serve as a comprehensive look at the entirety of The Real Adventures in Capitalism, a show that, we must emphasize, does not exist. We begin with Season 1, Episode 1, The Boss Lady. The episode depicted Dr. Isabel Helga Anastasia Parvati Wondertainment V, Ph.D., sitting dejected in an office chair. Emma, her new assistant, entered the equation, much to Isabel's initial disappointment. She was used to corgis named Jeremy and lots of ice cream, not boring business talk. But after learning that she and Emma might have more in common than she first thought, Isabel's mood began to improve. Season 1, Episode 2, Ticker Tape Tango was a classic black and white rubber hose animation. It included a big band musical number, though no one interviewed by the Foundation could recount the exact melody or lyrics to the song. The executive board made an appearance, depicted with hissing voices, ticker tape mouths, and an obsession with all things corporate. Classic slapstick comedy and absurdity ensued. In Season 1, Episode 3, Isabel becomes president. Well, you can extrapolate from the title what happened. Isabel became president, with Emma as her vice president, and Jeremy the Corgi as Secretary of State. During her tenure, she replaced the nuclear arsenal with jelly beans, helped cats and dogs live in peace. She turned debt into donuts, and abolished any political parties that did not involve dancing. However, it was revealed that Isabel was elected by mistake, and she was removed from the position. Season 1, Episode 6, entitled Cryogenic Chaos, featured just that. The story was filled with roving dinosaurs, various big feet, and red-robed prehistoric cultists. Fun fact, some of the dinosaurs depicted in this episode, which never existed, had feathers. In Season 1, Episode 8, 3 corgis, all named Jeremy, attempted to rescue Isabel from a board meeting. However, being small dogs with no opposable thumbs, they were unable to accomplish their mission. Season 1, Episode 10 followed 3 men: Edwin, Theodore, and Reginald. Edwin cared only for money. Theodore for adventure. Reginald dared to dream big and work hard. While Edwin stayed in London and Theodore ventured out into the world, Reginald traveled to the Chicago World's Fair to showcase his toys. He received a job offer there from the Anderson factory, who were looking for a draftsman to design their toys. Season 1, Episode 11 was called The Terrible Tale of Mr. Red. Mr. Red was pale as a ghost, except for his bright red hair and his red hands. He killed guards, workers, misters, misses, businessmen, and more. He made his way to Isabel's office. She cried as he jumped at her. Emma jumped between them, battling Mr. Red. He collapsed in defeat and found Mr. Hungry waiting. Season 1, Episode 12 was only made of sounds: teeth grinding, flesh tearing, a swallow, a whisper, "It is very hungry." Episode 13 told the tale of a dreadful factory built by wicked hands that fed on flesh. Season 2, Episode 1 was titled Road Trip. It began with a bright purple convertible speeding down the highway somewhere unknown, somewhere alien. Emma drove wearing a bandana and sunglasses with a pair of uncharacteristic jeans. In the passenger seat, Isabel sat with Jeremy on her lap. Emma flipped through the radio stations until she gave up. It's not gonna stop hurting. I'm sorry, Isabel. Episode 2 began with hideous, horrid swine creatures at the windows of a diner. Emma built barricades as Isabel hid under the counter. Then Isabel began to draw a battle plan in ketchup and mustard, designing a counterattack. The swine things were toast, thanks to her direction. Season 2, Episode 3, Red Planet Blues, was a funeral on Mars. No guests were invited, but 2 showed up anyway: Emma and Isabel. They sent the space rover Opportunity off to her resting place together. She could no longer call home, but she went there just the same. In episode 4 of season 2, a man in a red turban and black bathrobe, SD, ran into Isabel and Emma just as he had many times before. A comet fell to Earth. A deer climbed from its ruins. SD challenged it and was vaporized into a metallic fog. Episode 5 saw a hard time in the House of the South with SCP-1483, aka the Third Antarctic Empire and the Empress of Antarctica. In Episode 6, the world was in disarray. A dead Leviathan collapsed across the highway. Emma was buried beneath a tide of rotting entities much like SCP-106, and Isabel, Jeremy, in her arms caught between worlds. Episode 7 was a throwback. A throw way back. It was the beginning of time, everything bathed in darkness. Then came 3 brothers and a tree. The cosmos followed, the gods above and below, of light and dark. And then, Emma Azalthea Brown. Nobody important. Emma woke in a landfill many years later to the sight of 3 trash gods with magpie heads. They searched for a buyer for this nobody, and their search took them down into the court of the Scarlet King. In episode 8, Isabel was lost and alone. She wandered through the worlds, only Jeremy for comfort. Then she was found. She was pursued by those who would want to capture her, to sell her. When she stopped running, she is in the mountains. There is snow, and it is so cold. With nothing else to do, she curls up there and cries. Episode 9 was another flashback, the tale of Reginald Westinghouse. He took a job at the Anderson factory, and at first it had been a dream. But the dream soon turned to a nightmare, and he worked until his fingers bled. But he broke free. He ran away and changed his name. It was a fresh start with the toy factory he had always wanted, but still he dreamed of an heir. Reginald crafted a son, but the boy came out wrong, cruel. He tried again, making a daughter, but she was wrong too. She had joy and wonder, but was naive, head firmly planted in the clouds. So he hid himself from her, until he passed away from this world. Episode 10 began with an old man and a wolf trudging through the snow. He wakes Isabel from her sleep and leads her to a cave up in the mountainside. Through the cave, he promises a way home. She walks inside and it's dark, empty. But then, voices, a song. Isabel speaks and whispers, "I raised up my hand, and there was fire." And there was. A fire bloomed, filling the cave with light. She learned the secrets of the Wonder Maker and the Firebringer and creation itself. She knew then she would be able to save her friend. Episode 11 was titled In the Court of the Scarlet King. It began in the deepest point of the abyss, in the pits of darkness beneath a black iron sun, belching smoke and slime. The water was thick, turned to sludge from oil and flesh. The air was filled with agonized screams. And there, at the heart of it all, was Emma, bound in chains, beaten and bruised. She was thrown into a cell and left alone inside. All seemed hopeless, but then she snapped her chains as if they were nothing but threads. She stood, stretched, and wiped the blood from her nose. She spat out a tooth. Then she pressed her hands into the wall and shattered the palace, throwing herself out of it. She did not rush to freedom, but to the throne room of the Scarlet King himself. Those that remembered the episode recall the ensuing battle as spectacular. Bones vaporized, heads bashed in, blood painted the walls, and brimstone splintered across the screen. Emma battled dukes, demons, leviathans, and packed a nuclear fusion punch. The king watched the battle unfold and gripped his lance tight. As Emma tore a leviathan in two, she rushed toward the throne. No, not the throne. Toward the brides of the Scarlet King lying on the floor and pierced with spears. She approached the smallest bride, the seventh, and reached for the spear. She grabbed hold of it and pulled with all the strength in her body. With a great cry of effort, the spear was pulled from her body. The seventh bride was free. The spear fell to the ground, shaking it with the impact of its fall. At this provocation, the king stood. Emma called out to the bride, urging her to go to seize her freedom. The seventh bride stood on unsteady feet. With one hand, she grabbed at the wound in her stomach, and with the other, she picked up the very spear that had wounded her so. She formed a sign of waymaking and vanished from the court. Emma dove toward the king, screaming at the top of her lungs. But the king was far stronger than her, and he swatted her away like a troublesome insect. She skipped across the floor like a stone across a pond. She struggled to her feet as the Scarlet King advanced toward her, a spear in his hand. The screen faded to black. Cut to the seventh bride. With her ancient magics, she spirited SCP-231-7 away from her hellish life. She took her to a quiet place where peace reigned for one moment. The seal was broken then, a fire rising up above Montauk Point. The center could not hold, and there was a great and terrible noise. Episode 12 was the dawn of the final day. As the final day began, a man in a torn lab coat stood on a cliff by the sea, holding a leather-bound book. No, not leather. Human skin. He cried out to the sea, face and arms dripping with blood. The Davites were coming. They are eating history. The walls of Uruk crumble. Harappa is devoured by demons. Ramses lies vivisected open atop the Great Pyramid. Cyrus is paraded through the streets atop an iron spike. Athens meets a relativistic kill vehicle. Qin Shi Huang is flayed, and still he screams. Jerusalem is swallowed by a pit of cinders. Rome chokes on chlorine gas. Byzantium drowns in blood. Charlemagne is crucified in the Palatine Chapel. William's men hang him from the mast with his own spine. The Great Khan strangles his sons in their tents and runs out into the steppe alone. Baghdad is buried in the ashes of its citizens. Oh God, Joan, what have they done to you? Moctezuma is fed molten gold before all his people. The Mughals cannot stop the tide of flesh from the sea. The siege of the New World is ahead of schedule. The reign of terror enthrones a hanged king. In Flanders fields, the tumor mesticizes. The Sarkists feed the Tsar to his people. The Germans walk out into the fields and forests to lay down. Stalin starves himself in his own gulags. The Americans build themselves a great and hateful engine and throw their children before Moloch reborn forever. The veil tears apart. They are here. They are now. They are upon us. And then the world burned, crumbling to pieces. From deep within the library of Yggdrasil-Nahash, the serpent emerged. Hakama, the once broken and now whole goddess, joined him, and together they watched it all come crashing down. The Scarlet King rose up from the pit, together with his Leviathans and his demon lords. The gods were at war now, descending from the heavens and rising from the depths below. The three brothers in black robes rode their white steeds, leading an army of the risen dead. The library burned. The two sons of Adams met to battle once again for one more time. Nahash was torn asunder, and his sister was broken all over again. And then it was all over. Darkness, true and complete. The dead crumbled to dust, and the stars blinked out one by one. No light anywhere in creation, except for one. 36 saints gathered on the mountaintop to fulfill their destinies together. They would break the seal of the Scarlet King. There was no other option. Meanwhile, he was taking his new throne. The 13th episode of Season 2, the closing episode of the show that does not exist, was the end of The World Goes Like This. It began with the dark and starless mists, and a man there, wearing the robes of the 36, weeping, praying. He cried out to the only source of hope left in the universe. From the mist stepped Ahibat, once the seventh bride. By her side, Grace, the freed girl. The Empress followed, then Harker the Fist, then finally, SD, riding upon the deer. His body was different, but he was the same. Little reunion of fools we've got here, he remarked. Fools we are, but we are the fool's fools, said Ahibat. She tapped her spear against the ground, breaking it into 7 pieces. SD took his piece first, then Set touched each one, leaving them glowing white. The Empress took hers, singing an old song about Antarctica. Each of the others took their piece in turn. Down in the abyss, Emma was lying on the ground, still. But then a pair of red sneakers walked toward her. Emma's eyes opened. Isabel reached for her, lifting Emma up into her arms, having her friend onto her shoulder. She waved to the audience, breaking the fourth wall. Hey guys, sorry I'm late. She joined the others, the warriors sharing the spear, and settled Emma onto the ground. She thanked her for all that she had done. Then she snapped her fingers, and a fire ignited. She took the 7th spear and began to sing the oldest song. The stars turned back on one at a time. A fireball, shaped like a corgi, jumped from her shoulder, running around her feet. Everyone was ready to go. There was no more waiting around.
Isabel waved her hand, and the mist parted. There before them was the throne, and the king upon it. He had eaten his servants, and so there was no one left but him and the warriors come to slay him. He attacked the seventh bride, but she freed herself. The warriors descended all at once, moving with the push and the pull to and fro, as if in a dance. Then the killing blows. First to the king's right eye, then his left, his liver, his stomach, his right arm, his heart. Only Isabel remains. Emma smiles in approval, her first smile. Emma turns to ash, lending her fleeting bits of strength, and Isabel pieces the Scarlet King's skull. The all-death approached, and Isabel held out her hand, offering a dance. Creation and destruction together as one. The screen faded to black, and Isabel spoke. The end of the world goes like this. Everyone lived happily ever after. Now go check out SCP-001 How Actually Powerful is the Scarlet King, and SCP-001 Scarlet King Dust and Blood.